Just Luke Ford and the dangers of e-personality. If he's an introvert, incel or whatever, and when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process. What's the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates?
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're gonna fulfill the Canadian dream and the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm gonna go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm gonna be successful. And one day I'm gonna have my own apartment. I'm gonna have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm gonna have my own possessions. I'm gonna see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. All right, so it looks like there's another source of sound coming through on the show. All right, there we go. We're fixed. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm here with Doooovid, back at the Week in Review. Looking forward to all the fun stuff we have to talk about this week. And I will hand it over to you for the introductions, if you're ready.
Yeah, thanks. So just adjusting my camera. So I guess not a huge week, eventful in my personal streaming. I had Charles Moskowitz. And now he's not doing on YouTube, but all those other platforms. We had an interesting conversation. We talked about, God forbid, the escalation of violence, and we're talking more about America and possibly African American Jewish violence, but also in Israel. And it turns out that it escalated. So we're going to be looking at what's going on in Jerusalem. Continuation of the metaphysics of the escalation of force. And, for a personal conflict, like a fight between two people, to, God forbid, masses, even the brink of war, like what we might see in Israel, God forbid, in, Judas Maccabeus was on Killstream, debated Syrian girl. I watched that, so it's kind of, God forbid, related that, with that kind of debate that war is almost breaking out, God forbid. I may have been on Luke's this week. I'm not remembering because I don't think I was on Luke's this week. It was Sunday the last time when we talked about the Stampede, so I don't think I was on Luke's this week. So not that
if you
much
were, I missed it. I don't recall seeing you on Luke's.
Yeah, so not that much streaming. There were some interesting streams, some interesting things happening. I played some chess. I did very good in some chess tournaments. I won the Nation Leagues tournament playing for Israel today, first place.
Congratulations.
Although Israel as a team got fourth, but against Germany, Nigeria, Russia, so it was pretty good. And no one's reached out to me, so may not be that excited. Did anyone reach out to you?
For what? For
This
talking?
week in review.
Oh, no, I didn't talk to anyone. I guess last week was a bit of a shit show, so maybe people don't want to come back.
Yeah, so Arjun. So it looks like it's booked. I will be on his channel, Theology Unleashed, debating Ben Watkins at on May 21st. It's a Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And so I'll put the link to that in the chat. Looking forward to that. So hopefully we'll talk about
Have you decided what you're going to talk about per se, or just a conversation?
Well, it's going to be a formal debate, and I'll probably even present. I'm not sure I guess if I'm going to be the affirmative. So hopefully we'll discuss that. But we could talk about just like the minor drama. And Arjun, if he's around, he's welcome to come on Week in Review. But
I doubt that'll happen. I mean, he didn't even want to comment on the stream because he looked like a fool. I mean, because he didn't want to give my stream any quote a bump from the algorithm. So
he looked upset that how you treated him, and I guess I took a break and you two debated, and it looks like he took it a little bit personally. And I looked at it, didn't seem so harsh at all. But
it was a statement of fact. You want to come in here saying you're some kind of yogic master, and then you get challenged on something any master would never falter on, and then you falter, and then my proof is that's all I wanted to prove. It's like, you're just saying these words, you don't know what they mean. I'm calling you out on it. You're actually super arrogant. Because people always want to come at me and say I'm arrogant or condescending, and it's like, no. It's the other way
so it's
around.
definitely not my style, but I don't think it was a personal attack. I could see possibly how we interpret it to be a personal attack, but
you don't think what he said in the private conversation we all had was a personal attack? Because I could read you some quotes that would appear to be a personal attack.
Well, I mean, if he was upset, and even if you're right that he personally attacked you before you personally attacked him, doesn't change the fact if he felt he was personally attacked by you, and therefore...
Yeah, feels, right? Should feelings matter when having a debate? No.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty minor. If he wants to be, getting involved in debates, and I thought it was pretty minor. And also just that he stayed on the call for 3 hours. He was on for an hour, and originally we were just going to have him on for 15 minutes. But then, even though he had kind of bad sound, even had bad sound quality, but then he was on for the whole time. And then I guess eventually, you just told him how you felt, and then he got all offended. So it seemed, maybe it's nothing. So hopefully it's nothing. But
it's so just the way that basically every single white Hindu, other than you, if you can count as that, has treated me so far. So it's that's the thing they have in common.
Well, we've discussed this before, and I've expressed my opinion multiple times that reciprocating bad behavior is if it's axiomatic of bad karma, but generally you don't want to reciprocate bad behavior.
No. I mean, I think we all sort of deal with conflict differently. I don't know. I think everyone sort of does their own thing, and you got to be comfortable with how you manage conflict. You don't want to come off a stream thinking damn, I'm a real bitch, or I'm a real coward, or whatever. And then it's well, it's a buzzkill, and you don't want to stream anymore. So you got to find your own persona that you're comfortable with. That you get off the stream, and it's yeah, okay, wasn't perfect, but at least I maintain my dignity.
Well, I mean, you have your show. You just got to be you, and what that's when you you agree or put yourself out there to have a regular show. Like at the end of the day, you want to be authentic, and if that's you, that's who you are, and the people that follow you or like you will see you for that. But if you want to say it was objectively bad karma, bad behavior, according to someone's understanding of karma, you would say, okay, like I'm going to tell my followers and my students that creates bad karma. And she might have a different system that she doesn't think that way, but like, no, my understanding of karma is that that's you're reciprocating bad behavior causes yourself bad karma unnecessarily. And I'm not sure if memes comes around or comes back, but we're talking like the escalation of force and conflict to what's going on in Israel. And if you just assume as a postulate, if memes comes back around, you see like how well he's understanding multiple truth hypothesis. But it's really just a postulate. It may or may not be true. I quote it from Nachmanides, the biblical commentator who had the disputation with Pablo Cristiani, but saying that revenge is something of the spiritual realm. It's like a blemish on the soul that could only become healed through causing an equal amount or more harm to the person who caused it to you. And so saying that is a postulate that just like, okay, like, he offended you in some way, so that there's a blemish on your soul that could only be healed by causing him the equal or more harm. And that's why the multiple truth, that's just a postulate. And I just mentioned some rabbinic sage who says it. You could think of the logic of it. There might be other sources and other traditions. There might be some sort of psychometric test you could think of to look at it, but it's just a way of thinking about the escalation of force, that why you don't want to reciprocate bad behavior, why you don't want to create bad karma, because every time you cause pain to another person, basically there's an inhealable hole in their soul that can only be healed through reciprocating that amount of pain back or more back on the other person.
Yeah, I guess I really don't see it like that.
You're willing to suffer the consequences.
Well, you're going to suffer the consequences of denying that I'm right about everything until you accept that I'm right? So I could just throw it back on you. You're not an expert on karma.
Well, it's just a postulate of how karma works and why you don't want to create bad karma. So in your system, like, no, you could create bad karma in the, it's not like there's some, debt in the spiritual realm that can only be repaid through your own pain and suffering.
That is how it works, though. There are rules, and if they aren't obeyed, then there is suffering, and it's not anybody who imposes the consequences, just the consequence of going against the rules or believing things that go against the rules. So someone like me is really just warning people not to hurt themselves rather than actually hurting them in retaliation.
Yeah, and I mean, here we're talking relatively like a minor thing, like allow like a slight to someone's honor in a debate, which is relatively quite minor.
It's not minor though. It bothers people tremendously. That's why they had the blood sports, and like people said horrible stuff on that. Like there's a stream this week. I forget the name of the channel, but like it almost seemed like they were trying to bring back the old school blood sports. I think I told you about it. Like the title of the show was Christianity versus paganism. So I tuned in because I thought it might be interesting to hear an exchange on that, but they weren't even talking about that. They were talking about whether Aiden Paladin was a lolly fan. I don't know what that is. Don't tell me what that is. I don't want to know. But yeah, it was like crazy how much they apparently hated each other. So obviously these slights of honor, whether people conceptualize them that way or not are indeed a big deal to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it was so in memes. If you're talking to a duel, where it's like, okay, that's enough. That there has to be a duel, a fight to the death. At this point, my honor has been offended, and the world can only have one of the two of us. One of one of the two of us, can't go any further. Has to return to the ground where we came from, and the other person will continue on their life, and that's the only way to resolve, God forbid, this dispute, like what's happening in Jerusalem, where it's basically zero sum and ethnic, and there's two peoples, and that there's one plot of land, and it's just not enough, according to at least one side to go around, and one side's going to win and the other side's going to lose, to the point where comes to people killing each other. And if you're looking at your tit for tat escalation of violence, so it's okay, one person offends a person's honor to so I guess the backdrop, maybe we should go into what's happening in Jerusalem. And maybe
that link you sent me, is that a song? Because I've got it loaded up right now, the 6 minutes and 42 seconds one. Did you want me to lead with that?
Yeah, can you do it so I could talk over it?
Sure, and we'll just...
It says stream unavailable, suspended for policy violations. So it might have actually been the copy of a copy of the stream. So hopefully the stream's not going to have any problem for playing that. If it does, usually just lets them take the money or the copyright, or if not, we'll have to... so those words are
a new perspective
from benching, from the fourth paragraph, where after eating bread, you're supposed to pray for Jerusalem, pray for the mercy of Jerusalem. So it looks like we got Vince here, so I don't know if your Dr. Brown thing came up. So I'll just wrap up here on Jerusalem, and hopefully if memes comes back, or Jennifer will talk more about the metaphysics of the escalation of force, and just this one postulate about the revenge principle, that there's some sort of spiritual imprint caused by pain and suffering that you cause another person, that could only be mended by causing equal or more pain back in the other person. Not necessarily that's the only way it can be mended, but it's the natural inclination of the person to heal their wound through causing an equal or more pain to the other person, and how that principle could be seen here in Jerusalem and the escalation of force, where you have aggression of Israel on protesters met with extreme force, and the Arabs don't really have the power to extract anything upon Israel for cracking down on them, because they have the power of the state, numbers. There's only like 200 some thousand Arabs in Jerusalem, and you have because of mandatory military service, Israel really has access to tens of thousands of police and troops really any time in Jerusalem, and they use heavy-handed tactics on the Arabs, and they could complain about it, try to take it to international court, or God forbid, they could try to the natural inclination to get revenge, and that's what you see happening, and so too same for the Israelis, and it's largely the same thing, where they're both just calling out, like, look what the other person did, and therefore we have to act in kind to the other party, and God forbid it takes some sort of spiritual transcendental power to stop the natural escalation of force, because God forbid, or at least according to this postulate, the escalation of force is the natural condition of the material realm. It takes something supernatural for a person to decide to, for whatever reason, to not inflict the same amount of pain or more back in the person who inflicted that pain on them.
Looks like it's working again. I Don't know what that is, but I guess we'll have to be more careful with just playing any kind of video and just keep it to like less than 30 seconds. Unfortunately, because I don't want to have to deal with that again. But I think we're back now.
Yeah, I thought because it was a live performance that it maybe was okay, because it wasn't like a song. It was on a page, a live performance.
I
But,
think it might just be one of those things where it automatically happens. Like the channel owner is told that there's somebody using their content, and then they can just push a button and report it. So it's like an afterthought. So I'd say we just stay off the radar and don't play anything more than a little bit, because I don't want to have to deal with this. And you never know when it's going to be an issue, right? Or maybe we just get permission beforehand from the channel owners. Maybe, because this is just like, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. So yeah, I mean, just because of, God forbid, the situation in Jerusalem, I thought.
Did you want to do an opening chant? Because I noticed we didn't do that today.
Well, I could do the one in the video that. Did you want to say your week in review while I get the words up?
My weekend review has been writing and working on different recipes and having a lot of fun with that, plus gardening. And I went on one stream this week. It was okay, with memes of destruction. And there were some interesting streams this week that I definitely wanted to talk about, like in terms of karmic lessons and stuff. What's been going on. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, so that's basically, I don't want to talk about it too much now because I want to give Doooovid a chance to do his intro first and then get to Vincent, who's come on the show also, for those of you who can't see him. But yeah, do you have the words now, Doooovid?
Yes, I put them in the chat, and I said they're from the prayers after eating bread, and it's Rachem. Have mercy, Hashem our God, have mercy on Israel your people, on Jerusalem your city, mercy, 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 and on Zion the resting place of your glory, and on the monarchy of the house of David your anointed, and on the great and holy house, mercy, mercy, mercy. Rachem, Rachenu, Hashem Elokeinu, Rachem. O Yisroel Amechu Rachem, O Yerushalayim Rechu Rachem, Rachem, Rachem. Al Tzion Mishkan Kevodechu, Al Abayis, Al Malchus Beis David Meshikachu, All by Yisagodo Yakudosh, Rachem, Rachem, Rachem. This was a pretty popular one when I was in Brooklyn. I think it was a relatively new one. It came out like 15 years ago. It may have been Mordechai Ben David, the one in the video singing in Jerusalem. That was his tune. But I probably sung that song hundreds and hundreds of times because the words come right out of the grace after meals, and basically at most events, like weddings, Sabbath meals, any type of event, we always say grace after meals, and it was a very catchy tune. So like I sang that song hundreds of times, but it kind of became like the one last week where also just because of the words and the tune, became a popular tune to sing after something bad happens. So like, after the stampede, there's videos of people singing that tune, and in Jerusalem right now, because that's why I was thinking of it. But it was also just a popular tune, and obviously, like as a Jew, like our temple is destroyed, and the city of Jerusalem is still largely in its ruin from the time of the former glory, and as you could see, there's tens of thousands of Muslims right now making pilgrimage to pray at the mosque on the site where King Solomon's temple was. And he's saying, yes, as a fact, as a Jew, we do want to rebuild our temple. And it is esoteric and religious, but it's also political, nationalistic, ethnic, and practical at the same time. Where like religiously, what is what does it mean? It's messianic that there's going to be some sort of structure that we're going to rebuild, and somehow it's going to redeem the whole world. Versus just nationalistic, ethnic. God forbid, like ethnic cleansing. God forbid to just take the Arabs out of the area and build our big temple so we could have Jew-only events on, like a godless type way of understanding it. So, very interesting what's going on, and it does center around the temple that like Adam Green, you got Vince here, but factually, what's going on right now, the escalation to war. Centers around tens of thousands of Arabs making pilgrimage to the temple. And tomorrow is going to be a march of Israel's Yom Jerusalem, which is Jews celebrating Jerusalem. So it's straight on, almost God forbid zero sum, conflict that could result in war. Sometimes it could be eased down. You could have visionaries that could see some sort of greater picture, but as of now, it's looking like the conflict is just going to keep on escalating because both sides have inflicted enough pain on each other that the most likely course of action right now is for both sides to just keep on doubling down.
Well, it'll be interesting to go in that in much more detail as the show progresses. Vincent, I noticed you did a video talking about Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes, I did. But first, Doooovid brought up Michael Brown, so I'm going to be doing a pre-recorded debate with Michael Brown on May 31st, and as soon as I have that, I will post it up on YouTube in a stream. So I'm excited about that, and maybe next time I come on, we can review. I need to start preparing all my points against him because I told you he wrote about my blog and everything in a book, and he wrote out why the Noahide laws are not a problem. And so, that's something that maybe we can go over next time. But yeah, okay, so did you guys see that recently Milo was back in the news for announcing he's ex-gay and he's going to open up a conversion center?
I did watch in Two Speed the EMJ Owen Benjamin stream. Like I hadn't watched any of those people for like quite a while, but I did end up seeing that. So that's about all I know from it. But yeah, I mean that he's a big enough figure. I saw the stories. I think Luke Ford was covering that, and so I'm not sure what your angle on it is, or it's just a way for you to publicize and get more publicity towards some of the agenda you're pushing to kind of like preach to his already established choir.
Well, what happened was, so obviously Milo is part Jewish and he has identified as Jewish before. So he had a Telegram group, and me and some friends on Telegram were like, well, he's Jewish, so he should make his position on the Noahide laws known. So we went into the group and we were asking and stuff like that. And we got thrown out, and we were told that the Noahide question has no place in Milo's group or anywhere else, and that we were being thrown out for our monomania, Noahide monomania and stuff like that. So that had happened a while ago, and then I saw that he was doing this ex-gay thing, and he's going on this grift saying that he has no money, but now he wants to open up a gay conversion center, so he's obviously going to be looking for funds. And I never really liked him. I don't think he's a good influence, and I don't want him to regain any kind of influence, especially with what he's doing now is just stupid. But what happened was I noticed that he did an exclusive interview with LifeSite News, and LifeSite News has worked with Arthur Goldberg who is this big Jewish Noahide law activist. And they, in their writings, have said that Noahide law is the foundation of American civilization. And they've also talked about how Arthur Goldberg had opened up a gay conversion center, and it had been forced by the shut closed. So I was like, well, he's being interviewed exclusively by a Catholic Noahide website. He's claiming to be Catholic now. And they're connected with Noahide and Arthur Goldberg. So then I found this other group that his friend admins, and I went in there, and at first his friend said that he would ask him, but then later he changed and said he wouldn't. But in that meantime, I found that there's a nexus of 5 websites, the Church Militant and others, that are related to both Arthur Goldberg, that gay converter, and Milo. They're publicizing about Milo, and they're all Catholic Noahide groups, and they're all connected to Arthur Goldberg, and they're all promoting Milo. So my contention is that the Catholic Noahides are basically working together, because these ones who are shilling for him, they're like doing it, I think, all through this Arthur Goldberg guy is who the connection is. And they're the ones who are going to be in charge of like Milo's development, and, that kind of type of Catholicism is going to be in control.
The recovering homosexual kind?
Well, no. Well, Milo wants to recover homosexuals, but I'm saying that he's being backed by Catholic Noahides, and he's involved with this Arthur Goldberg guy.
Okay. Well,
And
the
he doesn't want
Catholics
to
were the
admit it.
original Noahides, right? So
What? Oh,
the
yeah, and then
Catholics were the
we were
original
banned.
Noahides.
We
So you
were
gotta
banned
just
from
face it.
the thing, and then his friend had a group, and I went in there, and after I asked, then I started publishing things about Noahide law, and they got deleted, and the topic is now banned in his friend's group, who at first said he would ask. So they're like protecting him. He doesn't want to say it. His friends are protecting him, and all of these Catholic Noahide groups are supporting him with this Arthur Goldberg guy in the background.
That's the history of Catholicism, Vincent. Why would you be surprised, thousands of years after its inception, that it operates the same way it always has?
Why, with a Jew kind of doing all the work in the background?
Well, I don't know that I would word it in that manner exactly, but this is the base. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that Catholics were the original Noahides.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a tough sell to then turn around and say to modern day Christians, well, you should be anti-Noahide, because you're not really going to be able to formulate. I don't know how you'd convince them, basically. So this is basically, what else do you expect?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on which Christian you're talking about. It's harder when you're talking to Catholics, and there's certain kinds of Christians that I think get it and are not. Well, the point is, are the Jews lying when they tell Christians that they're going to be able to practice their religion? So some of them are under the delusion thinking that they will, but those who know that they won't, they are going to easily be convinced that they're not Noahides, or that it's a problem and stuff like that. But you're right, a lot of Christians...
Their religion is Noahide. So you're saying you're not allowed to practice your religion, you have to be a Noahide. What's the difference?
You're right that a lot of Christians are starting to say, well, our religion is already Noahide, so we don't need to worry about this, and it's not something to worry about. So you are right about that, but there are ones that can see through the agenda, and so they're more combative.
What do you mean see through the agenda? The ones who think that they can have a Christian anti-Noahide movement are the delusional ones. That's a contradiction in terms.
Well, no, not necessarily, because
but yes, I mean, some anecdotal Christian who knows nothing about the religion and claims to be against something, that doesn't mean anything when the religious dogma says the exact opposite.
Well, I think if you're saying that they were Noahides, I think they're incomplete Noahides. They're not full Noahides. Christians are not perfect Noahides.
I don't know. They erased all of the European
They
pagan
did,
religions.
but
That's
that
pretty
was
good.
only that
That's
was
pretty good.
phase
I mean, if you
one.
look at it in terms of efficiency, they razed that shit to the ground. They destroyed it and buried it and ridiculed it. They still ridicule it to this day. They say that there are, horrible things about the pagans. So I don't even want to repeat them.
Yeah, no, well, you're right. And Jews have mentioned that Islam and Christianity were used to kind of prepare the world for the Noahide laws, but they also admit that they're not the ultimate destination. That's not where they want to stop. I mean, they have a bigger goal, and they want to get rid of Islam and Christianity and replace it with pure Noahidism.
What do you think about that, Doovid?
Yeah, I wouldn't assume intentions like that. I mean,
It seems a bit off because it seems like there's more and more Christian sects as time goes on. I don't know as much about Islam. I know there are some sects, but it seems to these systems seem to proliferate more sects over time.
well, I mean, if you say that it's God who's doing it, it's a spiritual force that's doing it. It's the prophecies of the Bible coming true, or are you going to say that it's a collective, group strategy, and then where does this group strategy derive from? So there's a lot of axioms that have to be analyzed to really make intelligent conclusions or findings on the subject, and just saying what so if you take the Maimonidean view that Christianity, yes, it is spreading Noahidism and getting the world ready for Messiah, and it is largely flawed, and God forbid, in the language of Maimonides, is that when the real Messiah comes, is that Christians will be able to see that their ancestors made minor mistakes and recognize the correct Messiah. So, like in the language that Vince uses of the Shituf or something like that, where you say the Christian is right now that's not what they believe. They don't believe that the Messiah is going to come and it's really what the Jews prophesize, not what they prophesize, but they're going to recognize and but it's an assumption of judging people positively from the Judaic point of view that when that time happens, that yes, the majority of people would just of course my ancestors just made a small error and thought it was Jesus Christ when it was really really the Messiah that the Jews predicted, and because they had believed in Jesus Christ or were familiar with it, that at least they'll be closer or more able to recognize the true Messiah that the Jews prophesied about when he comes. So, and that's really the orthodox, straightforward, theology that a Jew's supposed to look at it. Whether you're going to talk like a motive as people pushing these things versus kind of like a doctrine, what we believe, and and then you need to look at the combination of a people and the people who follow the religion, and the effects that it might have on the adherents and how they in larger society is more complicated.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is a slow evolution, and that they're not taking this route where they're like going in and being like your idol worshipers and you need to change. They're going in a spirit of, well, this is a discussion, and maybe right now you're not idol worshipers, but we still have critiques of your religion, right? And the idea is those critiques, you just critique it more and more and more and try to
the real Messiah. So it's not necessarily like getting the people to weed out like their idolatrous beliefs. So that that's also part of it. But it's saying that eventually the real Messiah that the Hebrew prophets prophesied about will come, and all of humanity will, basically recognize or be destroyed. And because Christians were Christians, they will have a much larger chance and ability to recognize the true Messiah, because like as Maimonides said, they'll see, oh, my ancestors were almost right. They weren't completely off. They were pretty close to right. They just had a minor God forbid problem, that they thought it was Jesus when it's really what had nothing to do with Jesus. It was the Messiah that the Hebrews prophesied about, and that will be recognized by all of humanity.
Well, that is taking into account, I mean, there's different opinions whether Noahide compliance begins before or after the arrival of the Messiah, but I think that either way, whether the Messiah has to arrive or not, the eventual idea is to get rid of Christianity eventually. And
I'm saying theologically, the idea is for all of humanity to recognize the Messiah, that the Jews believe in.
but
So
that might
the goal isn't necessarily Noahidism. The goal is Messiah coming and redeeming the whole world, and it's going to be the Messiah of the Jews, descended of King David, the ones that the Jews recognize as Messiah, not the ones that the Goyim recognize as Messiah. But I mean that's saying that theologically, I think, is the main factor, is that Jews believe a Messiah is going to come, and it's not going to be Jesus.
But they also believe that there's going to be some force and violence involved, and like the whole world is not going to just accept him. I mean, he's going to subdue them, and Maimonides says that the Messiah will spread Noahide law. So, there's going to be people, if it is messianic, which it doesn't necessarily need to be, but if it is messianic, there are going to be people, i.e., certain factions of Christians that I think by that time have not been fully, have not come close enough to Noahide compliance, that they would be wiped out. And I think that there are Christians who realize that they are not, this idea that we're stopping at Christianity. Christianity is not idolatry. I think that there's Christians who know that that's a
Can there
lie.
really be said to be more Noahide compliance now than when Christianity was first instantiated?
When you're talking about
Yes.
a postulation of what's going to happen,
Isn't homosexuality one of the Noahide counter indications?
Yeah.
And it would appear the world has been going into a direction of higher tolerance of homosexuality for quite some time. So how exactly do you argue that the Noahide laws now are more efficacious than they were in the beginning?
Well, there's a reaction against that, and I think that it's purposely being mismanaged to create as much conflict as possible.
But that's not an answer. You got to point to evidence. You got to say, because of these things, society is more Noahide compliant today than it was when Christianity was first instantiated. Therefore, we can infer that it's going to go in an even more Noahide direction in the future. But that's not what we
no,
observe.
they're right now, they're only starting these manipulations now. These manipulations, Noahide manipulations, have not really been going on for centuries. If
Christianity is the first Noahide movement, Vincent.
Well, I know, but there's been no.
What is the Nicene Creed if not the instantiation of Noahidism?
I know, but what I'm saying is that.
And back then they would kill anybody who dissented against Christianity, right? So obviously it's been
wave. It was first wave. It still needs to be ironed out to be fully Noahide. It was first wave Noahidism. It's not what they want. That's not the arrival point. And I think, yes, that Christianity is becoming more compliant to the Jews than ever before. So I think that
I never had a Christian kill me for not believing in their religion, though, which would have happened back in the day of the Nicene Creed. So it would appear the Christians have been defanged quite a bit, at least on that level.
Yeah, they've been defanged, but not because the Noahidists wanted them to. That's because they were forced.
Because the people who weren't in favor of the system of government had a huge thing called the what was it? Renaissance. that the European pagans have been basically having nonstop fights against this stuff since its inception. That's why Christianity has so many pagan symbols in it. Or not symbols, but attributes.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know. I think it
The
pays
question is
to add this.
society more Noahide conforming now than it was in the days of Christianity? And how would you establish that? Because it would appear that someone could point to the homosexuality thing and say, well, what's up with that? That's a contradiction, isn't it?
it might be happening more in general society, but the religion of Christianity may have become much more manipulatable by Jewish forces.
But you can't establish that it's Christianity per se that's manipulating people, right? Like you're making the mistake of thinking that people's actions are predictable through the things that they believe. But most people don't even know how to reason using their beliefs. We've seen this on the show over and over and over again. People claim to espouse beliefs, you test them, and their testimony contradicts their own beliefs. Like the conclusions of their own beliefs are contradicted literally by their testimony. So what does that tell you?
But I mean, like, there's plenty of Christian Zionists that understand Christian Zionism and it affects their behavior. I think what you do does affect your behavior.
It doesn't matter what you think, it matters what you can prove. And what I'm saying is that you're falling into a trap.
What you believe does affect your behavior.
And you can't say to what extent, because you're not looking at this from the direction of what is it that I know for sure that I can actually prove. You're inserting this axiom that, well, what people believe must dictate what they do. And it's like, it's
to
not
a degree it does. Nobody denies that your beliefs dictate your action to a degree.
They assume it's true, but it's not true. That's what I'm telling you. I'm literally proving you why it's not true. If someone is not aware of what their beliefs imply, there's no way that they can be consistent with their beliefs.
Yeah, but plenty of people do. Plenty of people do know what their beliefs
Then how come people keep coming on this show and not being able to handle the stuff that are laying down? I'm not talking about you, or in particular, I'm saying in general. Why do people have so much trouble when confronted with the inevitable conclusions of their beliefs?
Well, I think that you should talk to some Christian Zionists and tell me that
what would that change? They would just lie to me in terms of what they believe. I've known enough Christians to know that when they speak about their beliefs, they're not necessarily being true but I think to what their actions are.
I think you would see a correlation between their beliefs and their actions.
To what degree of correlation? That's what I'm saying. Like, there's other stuff, i.e. people's actions, that are better predictors for what they de facto believe, because what they're telling you they believe and what they really believe are often not the same thing. And they can't tell you why.
What about Christian Zionists who work for Christian Zionism? I mean,
that's anecdotalism, Vincent. That's an anecdote.
How is that an anecdote? You said
saying, look at those people over there that supposedly prove my point, and I'm saying if I interviewed those people, I could prove very quickly that they don't even know what they believe.
I don't think that's
like
true.
How much autonomy does someone need before
they
can be said to be responsible for their own beliefs?
I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and most Jehovah's Witnesses I know to some degree why they believe what they believe, and it affects their actions. Like, they go out in field service because they're a Jehovah's Witness. They don't do it because for any other reason. I mean, it makes them go out in service. So they are being affected by their beliefs.
Yeah, people are affected by beliefs, but what people believe is not a predictor of their actions. Those are two different things.
If you believe that God wants you to go out in service and bring people into the church, then you're going to do it. It predicts your actions.
That's obviously not the case, though.
How is that not the case?
Because there's tons of people who quote unquote believe things and then don't act at all in alignment with those beliefs.
I know, but there's plenty of people that do. I mean,
the people that don't outnumber the people that do by a large margin. That's what I'm telling you. Like, who can you point to that actually acts out their own beliefs?
A lot of people act out their own beliefs.
Just point to one person.
Anyone who goes to church. Someone
going to church once a week doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, well, anyone who dedicates their life to doing things for an organization is acting out their beliefs.
You don't know why they're doing it.
They're doing it because they believe in what they're
Or because they
doing.
want money, or because they want a community, or because they want to have sex with somebody, or there's a gajillion reasons people do things. You're assuming. Okay, Doovid says
Okay, Jen,
logic is the European
if
man's.
your contention is that your beliefs have very little to do with your actions, then I don't know what to tell you, because that just sounds absurd.
You need to accept the argument on its merits. If it's true, it's worth accepting. And whenever I've made a mistake, it's often, well, a lot, I won't say every mistake I've made, but a large amount of mistakes I've made have been because I assume people actually believe the things they claim to believe.
Well,
And
I
I've
believe
had to like
you
chastise
believe.
myself about it lately to be like, okay, I got to realize I got to learn to read this stuff as like when someone says they like debating, what they actually mean to say is they like intellectual circle jerking. And when people say they like science, that means that they want to sound cool. So I've had to readjust my own estimations of what people are saying. And it's often not, it's often people don't say what they actually believe because it would be unflattering. So it's not that you can't get information from the things people say, it's just that you have to figure out a way to get rid of that subjective bias. And the way you do that is by comparing actions to beliefs. Like, I don't know how many Christians you've known, but I wouldn't qualify many of them as particularly passionate about their religion.
Yeah, well, there's an extent in which they believe in it. The less you believe in it, the less it's going to inform your actions.
The point is that you can't point to a dogma and say this will predict the actions of all Christians, because
The more
there is no such
the more
dogma.
religious they are, the more they take the dogma, the more it will predict their actions.
Is it the
Yes.
dogma telling them what to do, though?
Yes.
Then how come the actions change all the time? How come sometimes it's peace and sometimes it's war? It just seems
Well,
arbitrary.
because of circumstances and because it's not
So they're
the
not going
Bible.
by the book. They're
No,
making
well, the Bible
decisions
doesn't
based on
recommend all
circumstances.
war or all peace all the time. It doesn't, the Bible doesn't recommend one way of life constantly. You know what I mean? There's war and there's peace in the Bible. And
So why do Christians go to war? What triggers a
well,
Christian to go to war?
because
You can't
wars.
point to that. You cannot point to a.
Okay, there's certain things I can't point to, but you can point to certain behaviors. Like if you believe in Christian Zionism, you might, the more you believe in it, the more you might be involved in supporting Israel.
That may be something you could establish, but that still wouldn't prove that beliefs dictate actions. That would
The
be
more
one,
you
again,
believe in
anecdote.
Christian, the more you, so you're saying the more you believe in Christian Zionism, the more you support it with your actions, and there's no correlation.
What I'm saying is that you can't assume that that is why people are doing things unless you want to end up in a trap like Claire is, because Claire believes along the same lines as you. She's saying what people do is 100% consequent to what they believe, and so it's just a matter of changing their beliefs, and then their actions will be fine. But that's not true because most people don't understand what they believe to the extent they would need to understand it to be able to actually use it to reason.
No, Jen, I think you're being a little too intellectually insulting to the average person of the human race. I think
You are projecting your own qualities on other people. Pretty much
no,
anybody does it.
I think that you are
I think
just
it's insulting to assume people have more autonomy than they do, because then it's like, well, why can't you do calculus, Fido? And Fido's like, Mark, because I'm a dog, I can't do calculus. So you're saying like these people have all this autonomy in their thoughts. And I'm saying they don't. Some people do, but most people
well,
don't.
just because you can't do calculus doesn't mean that you don't
Metaphor.
have.
It's a metaphor, though.
Okay, but I mean, that's not a simple of whether or not you understand the consequences of your beliefs. I
Doovid,
mean,
you want to weigh in on this? I don't want to take up the whole show because I don't want to bore Doovid or anything, but did you have any opinions on this? Like, I don't know where multiple truth hypothesis lands on this idea that beliefs predict behavior, but I don't think you really buy into that too much, do you? That you would say it's more of a dissonance model. Or, I don't know, Doovid maybe can't hear us.
Yeah, no, I mean, generally, I think it's higher forces that act through us. that what beliefs might be indicative of. But yeah, I mean, that's why I focus on the hard problem of consciousness, because you can't really make any predictive. You could have a psychometric data where you're measuring output, but you really need to solve the hard problem of consciousness to be able to intelligently you recognize any of these cognitive patterns about why people act the way we act and how we go about making decisions. It's like free will, that people might not have free will, so moralizing doesn't matter. Then it's or the various even some multiple truth hypothesis, from like the general debate, like say Christianity versus Noahidism, is there really mirrors axiomatic of each other, where Christians largely believe that it's going to be second coming and it's going to be Jesus, and the Jews are going to have the last chance to recognize Jesus or be destroyed, God forbid. And the Jews, to some extent, have a mirror parallel belief that at the end of the days, it's going to be the Jewish Messiah, and the Goyim are going to have the chance to recognize the Messiah the Jews have always been waiting for, or, God forbid, be destroyed. So because they come from the same prophets, they're largely mirrors of each other, and in belief. But to a larger assessment of motivation, one thing is the hard problem of consciousness. It could be that there is no such thing as motivation. That you're saying like, oh, these people are acting in the way that they're acting because they're trying to carry out certain motives, is already making postulates that may or may not be true depending on the hard problem of consciousness. And so you could have a multiple truth hypothesis where you could say, okay, maybe motivations cause people to act in certain ways, and maybe there's group strategies and group motivations or ethnic motivations that increase to larger group behaviors. And there's going to be a lot of axioms and postulates on the way to doing that. And in order to do that, you need to weigh, what decision are you making on each one of those axioms and postulates, and what effect does it have from the consequences therefore had someone not agreed on that axiom or postulate. It was like Jay Dyer that Jennifer mentioned earlier. He was streaming, I was watching it. Is that most people don't really know how to debate, and just like Arjun, that he wants to debate, but he's got to work at it, or he's just not going to be good at it. And there's things like logical fallacies, and reasoning, and like Jay Dyer was saying, like people like to give narratives because just people who stream, people that like talking to a crowd, and just like, I'm going to tell you a story, and like stories aren't arguments, and saying, so it's like, well, I'm not here to debate. I'm here to just glory and revel in my time in front of the crowd, which could be a good strategy also, that just make it look like you're there to debate, and then talk to the audience for whatever reason. He was like, oh, you really think anyone cares who wins some Poindexter stupid intellectual point on this? Like, I'm here to increase my cult or win people over to a certain side of an argument, and and just structuring a public debate is a way to put in like little the pejorative subversion. But I think Vince has decent chances of beating Dr. Brown, but like Vince is probably just like Dr. Brown, maybe more so is this ascription of motive, which like to a lot of people, it's just like, I don't like ascribing motive, and it could be theological based on how they think about free will, or the hard problem of consciousness. We're just like, well, these people are acting like it because this is their motive, and it's just like, it's likely that a lot of people in the audience are not going to agree on that. You might have a certain amount of people that think like that. Oh, Vince is probably right, that those people are acting like that because that's their motive. But like relatively, your average person is probably not going to agree with that narrative, and it's probably unnecessary for your case. That you probably don't even help your own argument by ascribing your motive, that you're self-defeating.
Well, on motive, I see that your friend Memes is here, so I'm actually gonna go. But I just, yeah, that whole thing with Milo and whatever his motive is, he doesn't want to talk about it. His friends are protecting him. He's involved with that Noahide, those Noahide Catholic groups and that Arthur Goldberg and all that kind of stuff. So just basically my plan is to force him to come out and make some kind of statement on it, just so if enough people are talking about it and they're questioning it and it's getting in the way of his rise to fame once again, then that's, then he would have to come out and say something, and that's the whole point.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but I have the number to somebody that Milo gave their number to.
Oh, really?
I know back when they had, what was it, the quote-unquote straight pride parade, they had the Let's Take Back Our Pride counter event. I held the third event on that day. It was the rally to restore Sandy and or turtles, because politics aren't binary, and who doesn't like turtles?
Okay, that sounds cool. Well, I don't want his number just yet. That might be like...
Oh, no, I'm not going to... I would ask that person that had access to the number he had a couple of years ago, or at least the number he gave her. I'm not just going to give out somebody's number.
No, I know. I didn't mean it like that, but I don't want to. We don't want to stalk him or get arrested. But I'm already. I don't know. Maybe they will get me arrested. Oh, they Google took down my Indian Illuminati Exposed blog.
Do you think there's a reason?
The reason was there was a lot of people I exposed in that blog and a lot of big things, and I know a lot of people were really upset about it. So I don't know who it could have been or why. It could have been the American Fascist Party. It could have been any of the people involved. It could have been that the Jewish people. There was a Freemason guy that was in there. It could have been anyone.
Were you doxing people?
Yes, I was doxing them as all Noahides. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
But they took it down, so we'll see what happens. Maybe they're going to try to take down Milo too.
I tend to think we should avoid doxing people.
Well, I mean, were you posting private information about them?
No, I was just...
Yeah, exactly.
posting...
So, I mean, he wasn't doxing them in the sense that you're alluding to Memes.
I'm just saying a lot of folks, doxing means different things to different people, so...
I wasn't putting up their...
cataloging their online presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it's journalism, but, I mean, it's somewhat an attack. So if that's what you're doing, and you're trying to find out who's involved in stuff, and then you're going to tell it to the public, and then you're going to paint it in a pejorative light, it's, likely an increase in conflict in karma. But, it's a common strategy, and like relatively that, that's what journalism is about. Like, that's not what, Week in Review or really like Doooovid or Jennifer are really doing. We're more ideas people and analysis to that, but that is basically journalism. Although, like, obviously, you have your own bias and slant where you're not, you're kind of like just the facts, but it is what it is, and you could argue that it's a service to society. No matter who's doing it for whatever reason, that is just more information. But like, obviously you push back the people like, no, you're revealing secrets, or you're painting people in a way that they don't want to be painted in. And so obviously it's going to be pushback. I want to set my own narrative, and here's someone else setting a competitive narrative about me that's largely negative. It's like the increase in conflict, of course, that
is there a reason you're screen sharing the Hangout window, Doooovid?
Yeah, I wanted to do, if you give me a full screen, I'll do my news, my stories, and then maybe we'll go to memes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna head out. So, but thank you for having me on, and thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Peace out, Vince.
All right,
bye, Vincent.
Okay, so I think Jennifer showed me a meme, and it just made me think of this one, the School for the Gifted. I went to a school for the gifted also, and like, I'm pretty dumb. But Okay, so just some things that happened. Hare Krishna Guru, Blue-Eyed Man, um, Pakijangri Prabhu passed away and got a proper Vaishnava funeral conducted by his own disciples, and so the body was um, taken to the Ganges, cleaned, and then cremated, and all to chanting, and it was a large crowd of people because I guess he was a saintly person, and you could see that God forbid the spreading of, if it's mustard seed or sandal paste, I'm not sure the exact ritual of the body, and the cleansing of the body in the Ganges water, and then eventually the cremation, and so that's basically a proper Vaishnava funeral, and this to a blue-eyed man who became a ISKCON guru. So we've been talking about the cremation, so I just thought I'd show that. I'm not sure if you want to comment. I got quite a few things to show, so if you want to comment on any of these, just chime in. Here is more released footage of, God forbid, the stampede, and so you could see on the clock it's 12:41, and the walkway's basically open, and go back to this, is possibly what led to the stampede. It looks like you could see that people are moving from the left and right and going up and down, and I think the exit on the right is closed off for some reason. For some reason, they closed it off. But you'll see over the next 10 minutes that it becomes a stampede all in one direction. So here's the event, and you just see how crowded it is, how packed it is. But right now, there's people going in and out. And at this point, basically, there's so much people exiting that there are still a few people trying to get in, but they're up against a wall. But you just see it's masses there. This was a Hatsala, like an ambulance service person who got up to assess the situation. This was 4 minutes earlier where there was basically an open flow of traffic.
Let's not play it
And-
for too long because I don't want to get another copyright thing. Maybe if you could just scroll through it, because it looks like it's a news article.
Yeah, so it's the upper view, and you see that.
Was
they
there
just
any
keep-
reason they closed off that other side? Because that seemed to increase the density.
Yeah, so that will have to be revealed, but so and then it just gets crushed and crowded, and a few people get lifted in, but so you see more footage of kind of what happened, and just the nature of a stampede in physics, and it's really just overcrowding and pushing that causes it. And we'll see what's happening in Jerusalem. So let me just get a few of these. This was the New York Times. I pointed this out to Jennifer, the online cheating, Dartmouth Medical School. But competitive nature, gatekeepers for entrance into the elites and higher society. Is probably a lot of cheating going on. Here, the conflict in Jerusalem. It's interesting because the Log Biomer, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there's a lot of evidence that it is actually his grave, although some people dispute it. So one of the main priests of King Solomon's temple after the rebuilding of the second temple was Rabbi Shimon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, who's in the the Talmud and the Mishnah, and is buried in this neighborhood. Although, according to the archaeologist, it's actually not his grave. And the tradition and how we come to believe it was Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik's grave, and I've prayed there, I've went there many times, versus the archaeological evidence that was later found that it could be a Roman woman's grave, God forbid. But the neighborhood in dispute right now. This what's going on in Jerusalem, was because there had been Jews who had lived around the tomb of Shimon HaTzadik. It's actually right near where I went to school. I was in school a little bit in Or Sameach in Jerusalem, and so we're going to talk more about what's going on there. So this was Theology Unleashed with Hiridananda Goswami, and Claire Call was in the chat quite a bit. So Arjun, had Hiridananda Goswami. It was an interesting conversation. Jennifer watched it. I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that.
I thought it was funny to have that guy basically give Claire a spanking. It sort of put her in her place, like just sort of laughed at her, which is, I think, the right way to respond. So she thought she was going to get some BTFO, but he didn't really seem to get triggered or anything, which was nice. And I guess she eventually tuckered herself out. She had a pretty bad week. She was also on that guy Thomas Baden Reese show. And he let her have it, like pretty much along the lines of what I've said. Like, nobody wants to deal with someone who's going to be professional on the stream and then turn around and start being a complete asshole, writing reams of text about how terrible someone is.
Wait, a person would be two-faced on the internet?
Well, I was trying to talk about him talking about Vedic economics, and like all you're doing is talking about Claire.
Well, I mean, what do I give a shit what this guy has to say? No offense, but go ahead.
Okay. So here was the Royal Institute video about the spike, the neuro spike in electrical energy in the brain. Pretty complicated, but people who want to.
Oh, that was a terrible video. It was an hour long. Don't you think he should have made it like 10 minutes? It's unwatchable. It was like
from our week in review. It was, I mean, they do it how they do it for whatever the reason is. This
well, like,
was
to go
interesting
back to Arjun's thing, I wasn't bored to listen to it. Whereas this Miss Spikes guy, holy crap, I couldn't even watch 3 minutes of it. I was like, what's the point? Like, get to the point here. You didn't find it that way?
No, I mean, I guess I'm not so judgmental or negative like that.
What was he discussing?
Hashtag doubt.
Just the certain phenomenon that we call the spike in the pattern of electric signals in the brain, and how that could possibly affect cognitive functions or just brain function.
Was that part of the orienting reflex?
Honestly, I didn't. Yeah, I'm saying, like, I mean, Jennifer might be right. Like, field in the. I usually watch the videos of the Royal Institute.
If we keep going for a little bit and you don't change the screen, we might eventually get a fourth Doovid on the screen.
Yeah, so
we're at 3 now. Damn it! The line of Doovids has been broken.
Here was a video in some Jewish historical society about Canadian Jewish chess players in Winnipeg, like a Winnipeg chess club. So I actually found that kind of interesting. If people know a little Canadian Jewish chess history. The blue-eyed African American chief police I was mentioning, looks like he's going to be retiring and running for governor. Maybe as a Democrat against Governor Whitmer, maybe as a Republican. So it'd be interesting political news. I mention him sometimes. Here, God forbid, is the Human Rights Watch report on Israel. God forbid, basically saying a threshold across Israel authorities and the crimes of apartheid and persecution. So Human Rights Watch is basically putting forward a case that Israel is not really giving equal rights to Arabs, and that maybe not so much for the Week in Review audience, but anyone who is more academic or wants to know what's going on in Israel. You could read the Human Rights Watch report. God forbid, just see what does it look like on the ground. There's a lot more to it than that. But saying what are the grievances the Palestinians you might have. I watched all 4 hours of this in 2 hours, the longest interview Carl Friston had ever done. I think he said he quoted over 100,000 times his papers. I've read some of his papers on my public study sessions. Famous academic in the hard problem of consciousness. So here it is with the University College of London, this long interview, whole bunch of topics. I'm not sure. Did you watch it, Jennifer?
Oh, I don't think so.
So anyone more interested in consciousness studies, Carl Friston.
Are you talking about the one that's on the screen right now?
Why you took it off? But yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm looking at theoretical discussion. Whoa.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest names in consciousness. So there's a 4-hour stream with him.
That was a good one. The really long one where the guy was talking about his free energy model. That was awesome. I watched that whole thing. That was really good. Of course, it's basically just a shitty version of my theory, but obviously I encourage anybody to attempt to solve this problem if they can. I mean, he's worded it differently. He said it's minimizing free energy, which is very similar to maximizing entropy, except that wording it the way I have has an additional advantage that it meshes to the measurement limit much more readily. But he's going to be having to break down his stuff into entropy. Also, he just probably didn't want to be like putting entropy in the title because it's a bit too, I don't know. The word entropy just sounds super like upbeat and happy-go-lucky. Doesn't really have much of a place in theoretical physics.
Oh, I thought it was like the second law.
The way it's usually referred to is the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah.
Well, let me finish my stuff, and then you could talk more about any of these subjects. So here was a lecture at University of Michigan on computer science and implications to consciousness, and some interesting, nice slides and ways of looking at it. So encourage people to watch that if they want to know more about it. Luke Ford covered this in detail on his stream. The latest details about the likelihood scientifically of COVID-19 being a bioweapon. And here Luke Ford, kind of like he was almost watching Week in Review, but he might just not have that analytical side of him too much. But he did a little thing on structuralism versus essentialism. Read a tiny bit of this. Structuralism versus Essentialism, May 7th, 2021, by Luke Ford. Reality is too much to comprehend. We need theories to make sense of life, to understand the world around us. I believe in the power of structures more than the power of essences and personalities, yet we shape the world, but even more so are shaped by the world. I'm a different person in different contexts, and usually the structure determines which parts of myself will come to the fore. I'm a different person in one shul as opposed to another, as opposed to a church, as opposed to a yoga studio or a 12-step meeting or a bar or private party. I'm a different person when the police have pulled me over for speeding as opposed to when I've deposited a $15,000 check. I'm different when I'm broke as opposed to when I have savings. Money makes me bold. Poverty makes me fearful. In some contexts, I'm a pious Orthodox Jew. At work, I'm organized, efficient, detailed-oriented, and appropriate. I am righteous and with righteous friends. I'm focused on recovery in 12-step contexts. I'm parsimonious with my words. With people I don't care about, and in other contexts, I'm eager to make good impression. Sometimes I tailor myself to the other person, such as a date or when meeting someone I admire. If someone is dominant in our relationship, I bend to them. When I am dominant, the subordinate party either bends to me or we don't interact much. I had one girlfriend I yelled at. With other girlfriends, I walked on eggshells. With some girlfriends, we had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun. But with other girls, I was restrained and careful. Some girlfriends fit their lives into mine, but with other girlfriends, it fit my life to theirs. Most of my interactions during the day were transactional. I only do the I-thou relationship with a treasured few. and with a chosen few I deliberately give to. I love few people. My life is dominated by a handful of intense friendships, but numerous pleasant, though superficial relationships make my days of joy. I'm different when standing as opposed to sitting, when my outlook constricts as opposed to walking, and I get many ideas in running and laying down. I am different when doctors or dentists are standing over me, and I'm different when I stand over others. My emotions correlates about 90% with the direction of my life. When the blinds break or the drain gets plugged, it reduces my happiness until I solve the problem. I'm almost never happy when my debts are growing or my feuds are spiraling. On the other hand, when I'm getting along with others, building my savings, or making progress on my goals, I feel good. The structure of our body determines how we feel, just as how we feel determines the structure of our body. Emotions are only available with particular alignments of the body. To feel angry or depressed, you have to tighten and compass. When you are buoyant in your body filled with upward and outward direction, you will tend to feel serene. How we think and feel shapes the alignment of our body, and the alignment of our body shapes how we think and feel. When one hip is higher than the other, the back has to wrench to adjust. Given that the nervous system works to keep your eyes level, enough wrenching, and you'll likely be doubled over with back pain. If one leg is shorter than the other due to anterior pelvic tilt, your whole being will get distorted and rendered less effective. When your body is distorted and contorted or perverted, it will be harder for you to relate to yourself and to others in a calm way. Looking at order to understand any object, problem, or debate, the right way would be to focus on the question of what in the world in practice. Essence doesn't matter. Instead, what matters is the complexity, the structures, the context of things, the details of the global architecture by which things connect. So it goes on, and then Luke is going to Luke. But I read quite a bit of that just to get a feel of Luke, at least in his own ways, making progress on some of the ideas we discuss. So let me just finish these last two things. And so here was my rap I have on my YouTube channel is his brother, where the stampede occurred. And this was the chanting, actually pretty lively, leading up to the stampede. And so people like Hebrew chanting. Here's some good chanting. And here was his interview with one of the most senior rabbis in Israel about the theology of what happened. And so Rev Adelson is from the head of the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, and through one of his spokesperson, Rabbi Elazar Sorotskin. Terrible tragedy occurred to all of Israel as well, as specifically to Chinuch Atzmi, their educational organization. We have one teacher who lost her husband, and a teacher who lost her son, and some that lost their brothers. Everyone is asking, what do we say to the teachers? What do we say to the students? And how can we strengthen them? What Kabbalah can we accept? And here Kabbalah meaning just some sort of austerity. So Rev Adelson, the Talmud says, you're worthy to be taken for generations. The generations need strength. In order that the generation will be strengthened, they take the righteous. The righteous is taken for the sins of the generation. The righteous wants to strengthen the generation through repentance. When the righteous dies, the generation wakes up. So it was something to benefit the generation. Yes, dead were strengthened the masses. It was the merit of the righteous. The righteous benefits from it, that he strengthens the masses. And this concept is a way to reassure the students and teachers. Yes, the dead awaken us to repent, and they atone for the generation. There was a story that happened to the Chafetz Chaim, who had a son-in-law, a young man, Rasvi Hirsch Levinson. He died young. His daughter asked her father, why did he die? Wasn't he righteous? Chafetz Chaim told her there was a decree on the generation, and he atoned for the generation through his death. This was his merit. He strengthened the generation through his death. But they're asking, what you're saying is reassuring, but they're asking, they all want to take something on to accept austerity. Yes, we need to wake up. That's correct. In Shamir Saloshin, guarding the tongue, and in Kapeda, the respect given to tradition, not to be makbid with others, but so there won't be kapeda, that you don't have to be so strict with other people, that I should be strict with others, and others shouldn't be strict with me to appease others, so they shouldn't have aggression and love of the creation. So maybe it wasn't just that it happened by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, where Talmidim who didn't act respectfully towards each other died. Maybe this teaches, yes, correct, they didn't act respectfully. But God forbid, this is kind of the generic Judeo approach on tragedy, and saying Rabbi Breitowitz, who actually from Or Samayach, he's came to Detroit a few times, was a professor of bankruptcy at Harvard before he went to Jerusalem, and he's actually been on Lowell's Root and Branch and a whole bunch of popular streamer. But he was saying, God forbid, people die and they might not have did anything wrong, and there is an understanding when people die and didn't do anything wrong, and especially if it was the righteous that died, not for, didn't even do anything wrong, that has a power to atone for the larger sins of the whole generation, and also just like the general bad karma, that strife and discord between people leads to deadly karma. So he's saying, like, why do all these people die? He's saying because there's strife and discord, and whatever process of Kabbalah or karma, that you could feel the karma on the street of strife and discord, and then when people are dying, it's not so surprising, because it's like, well, haven't you felt the karma on the street corner? You're surprised that people are dying. So God forbid. So I did the week, I covered a lot of things. I'm not sure if Jennifer, you want to comment on Luke's structuralism, and then memes, if you want to analyze kind of what's going on in Jerusalem with the metaphysics of the escalation of force.
I think it's good that he wants to go in this direction, and I would encourage him to push into the axioms, because with a word like structuralism, it may seem, self-evident, but you're falling into the same trap as the people who refer to stuff like consciousness. Like, it's a form of special pleading to not define your terms. And yeah, I mean, even a term like time, right? If you don't define it accurately, you're going to run into problems. Maybe not right away, but especially if you're trying to make an epistemological, a philosophical, a logical argument of some sort, and you fail to define your axioms or your main concepts, you're going to run into problems. So now I cannot really say what Luke believes the word structuralism to mean. I can infer by the way the word sounds, which would, I guess, mean, I don't even want to guess, but the word structure itself is quite vague, isn't it? Well, it's a structure. Okay, like you mean like a building? So it's like a building. Well, is a motor a structure? Because it always sort of tends back towards the subject-object dichotomy. Where does the structure begin and the non-structure end? Because when we're talking about logic, if we don't have clear boundaries between concepts and we want to start threading these concepts together through logical permutations, but we haven't instantiated a boundary, well, then you're going to have a massive amount of bleed through. That's why we want to be very clear. And you'll find that your arguments will take the shape, if this is true, then this is true. And people might be sort of shocked to look at things that way in the beginning, but it's good to make your axioms explicit, because you have sort of two levels where you can disagree, and they're different levels. So rather than having both of them sandwiched into one big thing where we're trying to agree on words, right? Like, well, are people intrinsically good, etc., etc.? And to me, it's like, I get it. You want them of feels. You want the old pat on the back, but that's not necessarily going to get you anywhere that you want to go. So,
Right.
define the terms. And this is not just about Luke. Like, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just railing Luke here. It's like, I think it's a good first attempt, but really you got to open up with definitions. And if you're going to use any special types of logic, you got to sort of make it clear. Like Boolean logic has problems. Who is acknowledging these problems and trying to move beyond them? And how are we going to do that? So this is just what I'm hoping people will start to think about. But yeah, go ahead, Memes.
Right, right. And when you say you have to have very clearly defined axioms, I mean, you might be able to get through. I mean, heck, I mean, apparently at this point we've gotten up into space and apparently measuring things however many billions of light years away, according to what people are saying. We're doing this based upon not even necessarily having proven all of a large sum of the mathematics that have gone into this as well, because apparently that's one of the big things within the greater mathematics community is that does the math we have, the mathematical stack we've built over however many hundreds or thousands of years that we've been building up mathematics, how much of it is actually true? It may work, but
Okay,
what is the core? Go on.
I got an idea for you. Are you familiar with the idea in physics of modeling things as their center of mass? Like a coordinate transform into the excuse me, center of mass coordinate system?
I mean, no, but are you talking about like utilizing whatever the central point or the greatest point of mass is basically as like the center of your graph or plane?
Yeah, you ever heard the joke about like how does a physicist model an elephant like as a dot? You ever heard sort of jokes like, I'm not saying that's the joke, but jokes
right, no, I've
lines,
similar
like sort
things,
of
yeah.
the idea behind physics is that you're approximating an object. So let's say you have an object that is it could be an irregular object, but a continuous object, like think of a rock. Okay, so the rock is, let's say someone's thrown it, but the rock is also spinning. Okay, so the rock could be said to have two different types of velocity. So we want to understand the mechanics of the rock. So physics says, okay, so instead of looking at the rock, which has been thrown with a spin on it and which is moving forward, I'm going to transform my perspective on the problem into the center of mass of this rock. And instead of having the total system, I'm going to break it down to just the torque about the center of mass. Because by transforming to the center of mass, so you are doing your calculations from the center of mass of the rock. So that's now the stationary point. In our perspective, it's not stationary, but in order to do physics, so basically this removes a lot of the variables. Like, you know, the problem in physics where you have 3 unknowns and only 2 equations? So you can't get an isolated point as the answer. Your solution is a line.
You need to have at least 2 points there if you have 3 variables.
The number of equations, okay, it's not just equations, it's the number of linearly independent equations has to match the number of unknowns. Right?
I'm not an overly educated mathematical person, but that sounds accurate.
Okay, take it like this. If I have the line y equals 2x,
okay.
What's y?
Y equals
I
2x.
can't
I mean, it's 2x.
Well, it has multiple solutions, right? It doesn't have a unique solution is the point. Because
you would need the additional. Yeah, I got you.
There's 2 unknowns and 1 equation. But if I said y equals 2x and x equals 1, then you could turn around and say, okay, well, y is 2. Because I've now got 2 equations and 2 unknowns. So basically, this comes back to the idea that you need to match the number of equations to the number of unknowns, and a failure to do that means that your solutions are not unique. Because a unique solution is, in this approach, it would just be a single point, right?
Well, I mean, that's usually a good thing to start with. I mean, in the case of a rock.
I just want to go back to my example about the rock and just make sure I get the rock idea across. Okay, so what we do in physics is we transform our perspective from standing there watching the rock that just got thrown to being in the very center of mass of the rock. And so relative to that position, the rock has no net forward velocity, but it still has torque because we said before it had a spin on it. So you're basically removing one of the unknowns. And this is something that you can see it all over the place in physics. It's called the center of mass coordinate transform. So the question, in order to come back to what you were saying and how I think you can phrase it, is we're essentially modeling a rock as a point particle. plus some torque around the center of mass. So the question is that how much does this model differ from reality? Because there's a delta, right? There's the true path, and then there's the modeled path, and the modeled path is some percentage of the true path, correct? So the question is it a very tiny difference, or is it a big difference that's getting bigger each time we take a measurement?
Depending on the scale, it could probably get to be pretty big, perhaps even, well, infinitely big. Because that's interesting, because when you're talking about the model, it's like, okay, you're breaking it down into the rock has a velocity, but at this point, we're going to conceptualize ourselves, okay, we're at the center of the rock and we're attempting to measure its torque via the spin there. However, in actuality, if we're trying to do that model, there may actually be oscillation at what point, given the spin of the rock, especially if it's an odd, perhaps potentially quote unquote oddly shaped topology there may actually be oscillation at what ends up becoming the effective center there.
So we're basically doing a bunch of different things. Like we're saying, okay, well, that wasn't quite right because I forgot to factor in the lag, right? The friction of air. So then I say, okay, I'm going to throw another equation that is going to be an approximate model to the amount of friction, because the friction is determined by the velocity and by the area and other things, right? So it's like friction is a function of a lot of different things, but mainly it's the area that is in contact with the air and the mass.
It's what acts as the inertial force.
So it's largely, you could approximate it as like density. So the more dense something is, the less friction it's going to be subject to if it's thrown a la balloon or ball or whatever, right? But nevertheless, we would approximate it, and then we'd have an equation of motion that would now include this drag force of friction, but even that would have a delta between the predicted path and the true path. And the question you have to answer is, what's the delta between the true path and the predicted path? And if I make my model, if I use this same model on a finer system, does the delta get bigger or smaller? Because if the delta is getting smaller, what does that tell you?
It sounds like we're going in the right direction.
There you go. So you want to be able to tell if the delta is getting smaller upon successively finer measurements. And that's where the real trick is, because the delta doesn't get smaller when you do the successive measurements under the presumptions of the standard model. You get a multiplicity of results rather than a convergence. Because if the delta is getting smaller, that means you are actually ultimately converging on what's really there, which should be simple.
So your model, the delta decreases.
My model tells you what the delta, my model gives you the minimum delta.
Okay, so it would be within the parameters of what would be true.
Well, it would basically say that you're not going to get a smaller delta than what's predicted by the measurement limit, because the delta of the measurement limit is basically saying 3 + 1 per order is the highest number of linearly independent measurements you can make. And any other measurements you make on that will be dependent on the first three and the first 3 + 1. Moreover, the first 3 + 1 are dependent on each other, but they're minimally dependent on each other. But once you get to 5, 6, 7, they are 100% dependent on those first three, provided the first three were truly or independent themselves, right? So that's saying that you're never going to have more than 3 + 1 or linearly independent measurements per degree of complexity.
So basically, when you're engaging in an act of measurement, you basically found the smallest delta for the minimal amount of parameters, where it's basically going to make like a real
The
difference.
deltas in my system are the literal uncertainty deltas. Because the question is, how do we find these orthogonal observations? We don't know how to make orthogonal observations. We can just prove that orthogonal observation, well, we can not prove, but we can supply evidence that of this, what you call degeneracy. Now, this is not degeneracy in the common parlance. It means basically like equations can look different but still be the same. For example, we had y = 2x before. Now, if I give you the equation 2y = 4x, have I actually given you any more information?
I mean, you just kind of switched around the number of variables.
Well, have I given more information?
I wasn't listening. I clicked on something else. I'm sorry.
Y equals 2x versus 2y equals 4x. That's two equations, right?
Right.
But have I given you more information
Right.
in the second equation?
Yes.
The answer is no, because I've simply doubled the first equation to get the second.
Oh, okay. I wasn't actually. I just heard two numbers there. Okay, my bad.
Well, if I take y equals 2x and I double it, I get 2y equals 4x. So I can generate an arbitrary number of equivalent relations is my point. So 3y equals 6x. I could just keep going like that forever. I'm generating more equations, but they're degenerate equations, i.e. they're not independent from the original one. So you can make an arbitrary number of measurements on a system in the same canonical order, but they won't be independent measurements, right? So you get this example of the slit experiment where they introduced a magnetic field to quote unquote like pre-observe the electron, and they got different results because they were waveform reducing in the same axis. So if you waveform reduce once, then you waveform reduce again in the same axis, well, you're not actually diminishing the system on the second pass because the system's been diminished once. You can only diminish it 3 + 1 times maximum, but you need to build that perfect system to be able to do it. Which is what I'm sort of getting at, is that like systems of measurement will become better when we can actually integrate the proper orthogonal measurements, because we're not really doing that right now. We're not taking into account that successive measurements have a degree of redundancy.
Now, are you saying we need to have multiple measurements along a measurement, or
We've got to
fewer
figure out ways
measurements?
to make measurements in ways that are orthogonal.
Okay. So kind of like, rather than attempting to measure, maybe just observing an effect upon something. Kind of
Well,
like,
you have to sort of generalize the waveform and understand how its geometry is changing. So a waveform has one geometry, and then it has a different geometry. Like, think of the simple example of, I don't know whose law it is, but you know the one where there's a constant fluid flux through a tube that changes area?
the Navier-Stokes equations or something.
Yeah, you're familiar with this idea of conservation of the differential volume. So therefore, when it goes into a smaller area, it moves faster because it has to have the same flow rate.
Right. You're putting it's a narrower volume, so thereby the rate of flow would increase proportionately.
So that's the way to understand waveform reduction more generally. Like if you take it outside of just the pure electrons thing, right? Like there's a general waveform, and reduction is in some way like passing it from a tube to a smaller tube. So if you're going to do another measurement on that, you have to take into account that it's been reduced from what it originally was. And optimally, you'd want to re-expand it. And sure, it's lost the information from the first measurement, but then you can re-expand it to give it a bigger bandwidth so that your next measurement won't be on this smaller, reduced, more dense set, which is more easily subject to the effects of high energy, like breakdown, right?
Now, if we could actually observe maybe a constant delta between that change in state, just based upon like the analogy you were using there, maybe this won't work with waveform reduction, but at least for a fluid, if you could measure, if you could try to keep as consistent as possible that change there, if we could measure that change, could we not help increase our accuracy?
What change? The change is the measurement.
The change in the rate. Okay.
The fact that the rate has changed implies a measurement has happened. So
Okay.
you've got a measurement, and now you have to infer how the waveform was reduced through your measurement.
But if we had a series of measurements, could we not try to plot that out and maybe see if it was going in a direction?
Yeah, you can try to plot it out, but how do you interpret it?
That's a good question.
That's my whole point, is you have to interpret it as a waveform reduction. And what was reduced upon reduction, and what's left now that there's been a reduction.
I kind of like more of the old school style. It's like, all right, we have some film, and I think this was actually one of the proposed things for maybe measuring gravitational waves, utilizing, I believe, some sort of gold foil. But it's kind of like when they detonated and were testing the nuclear weapons back during World War II. apparently some of the clouds and the alpha particles from that were distributed there in the atmosphere came along either like a Polaroid factory or something like that that had a bunch of film, and they noticed there was a great fair amount of degradation to the film there. So basically they had the observational effect that, oh, something happened here. Now people may not have known what it was at the time, but utilizing something like that rather than trying to add additional energy in the system, you have an existing system, and then whatever you're attempting to measure interacts with that, and then maybe you could observe what happens via that. You still are going to run into some problems, but I mean, it might be a way to try to.
It's not about making observations, it's about interpreting the observations correctly. Okay. So right now we're not interpreting the observations correctly. We're not seeing them as successive waveform reductions. So if they already understood this, then they wouldn't have spent so much time dicking around with their stupid, shitty wannabe AI, and they would have known off the hop that they needed the eigenvalues to the wave equation of their data set. But they didn't know that. They had to discover that by mistake. Oh, we have eigenvalues. Oh, they represent the whole system to within 99.99% accuracy. This
whole this is one of the things that gets me, and this is actually one of the reasons why I really like a lot of what Professor Keating's doing, is because he's kind of trying to go back and like take a lot of this data and everything that may not have even been published and just try to see if he can kind of like correlate, corroborate, and everything. Because a lot of times you might have very just intricate, highly detailed experiments, and the information that comes back, well, that really wasn't what we were looking for, and it may never get published. I'm just like, wait a second, how much data do we have that's like, okay, maybe you didn't find what you had there, but maybe that's one of the keys to somebody else that they're trying to find for this, and this was something that would at least help open their minds to looking down this path. Like, that's what helps give me faith in humanity. It's like, all right, we have all this information. How much of this information is actually with people that can truly do something useful for it? And I'm like, I truly believe that we can start to actually level up. Yes, it might be corny and everything, but there's so much stuff going on. And as long as people that have this information, and a lot of folks, they're afraid to necessarily share things because like someone's going to steal my idea or something like that. I'm like, my man, my dudes, my dudettes, it's like, we have the internet. It's not like there's a time date stamp on like everything on the internet. I'm just like, and this is one of the reasons why I suggested, I'm like, oh, I should sign up for like the Wolfram Summer School or something like that. It's regardless of whether you think you can learn something or not, I'm pretty sure a lot of the folks there at the school will learn things from you. Just because I'm like, I'm looking at a lot of these models and everything. I'm like, how many of them actually understand like your conceptualization of the periodic table? Can that be modeled in a particular way? Would that provide insight to other folks that are working on that project to say, oh, this may be something that we're actually missing, or this little key component that will help us lead to maybe another innovation. Maybe it won't lead to anything, but never know unless we try. Rant over.
So why don't you do your week in review? You know, like I know you did. Jennifer was on your stream. We talked about entropy, and you should try to up your streaming game, public speaking game. So a good way to doing that is week in reviews, and even on your streams, I recommended Jennifer to doing like takeaways, like you're in university, group assignments, public meetings, kind of like summaries, takeaways, opening maps of what you're about to say. And as you become better at speaking, more organized as a thinker, you'll naturally do that almost all the time, where you'll have a structure of thought about what you're going to say, and you'll be able to give an introduction to what you're going to say, then say it, and then give like a summary, takeaway, and that just makes for better streaming, better content. So please, memes, your week in review.
My week in review. Well, that's very interesting. I don't really have a huge amount to review. It's just more of just.
Well, you did a lot of streams this week.
Oh, I did do some streams on things. That is true. Oh, that's right. The actual structure of this
Yeah, I mean,
program.
usually
My
we can review.
apologies.
We review actually the streams we did. I mean, that's the main thing we're reviewing here.
Ah, all right. In that case, let me actually bring up my channel. What did I actually do this week? All right. Okay, so I covered the top 10 animals that got drunk or high, according to an Australian article as well, which was very interesting because apparently bats have the ability to achieve the BAC of humans, but yet alone not really experience much impedance during actual flight, which I did find pretty interesting. And I do need to ask Brett Weinstein, seeing as he was a bat biologist at some point. I also memed one of my friends, author Stephen Walton. He happens to be at least a member of the quote unquote fandom menace community. And there's a running joke that he happens to have a quote unquote obsession with coffee enemas. So I put together a little compilation poking fun at him with there. All in good fun. All in good fun. You be you, boo. Did another quick bit on what I considered to be mimetic relativity as how the relations and causations. I'm starting to think there is a lot of intersects in some ways with physics as well, just because depending on the observer, depending on your situation, depending on what state you're at right now, because it's like, all right, maybe you get pulled over by a police officer, you had a really bad day, maybe you were fired from your job and everything, you're kind of grumpy, but then all of a sudden that police officer comes up, finds out just lost his father and everything, he's having a bad day, there's a level of agitation, there's stress there, perhaps it escalates, perhaps there's unrest, maybe something tragic happens. That is a possibility. Whereas if both those individuals had of not had those particular experiences, it could have just been, I'm sorry, officer, I was going a little fast. All right, have a nice day. That is a more extreme example, but again, we don't necessarily know another person's story. So, depending on your position, how you're viewing the world, your lived experience prior to that, and how you've arranged things, priorities, and threats within a hierarchy in your head of some sorts, giving different weighting to them, your response will depend. And then, oh yes, we had a stream with Jen about how does the universe even work, and she started trying to explain the Boltzmann equation to me, and that was a little bit nutty bananas. We jumped around a wee bit, but no, that was fun because, and the way I had come up from that, and I did a poor job in my opinion about trying to keep focused on that, was the fact that C often can be used as either the speed of light, the cosmological constant, or whatever the theoretical maximum speed of transfer is in the universe. And apparently, according to, oh, I forget the physicist's name, I apologize, but when they were measuring the effects of gravity, the gravity appeared to become extremely close, at least within, I believe, the bars of error of the speed of light itself. And just if that was the case, I mean, does that just mean that's the current upper bound that we know of on
It
the
means
speed of
that the
communication?
fastest transfer of information is the speed of light.
So C equals communication.
And that
I know
means that the
I'm trying to
gravity
be cute.
was not impeded by anything.
Cool.
It was moving around, and you measured the fact of it being moving around, and the fastest speed of measuring anything is the speed of light. It's a demonstration that it's
Oh.
the maximum speed of information transfer. But the gravity is itself self-acting. It's not, there's not gravitons moving beyond bits of mass. It's just self-attracted. But the information represented in the movements of the gravity field caused by mass are still subject to this law that light is the speed limit of the transfer of information.
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I don't necessarily know that to be true, but my base gut instinct
What do we
is
know to
you're
be
right.
true? At some point, you have to make a commitment to say, yeah, this seems reasonable, and then define your criteria for changing your mind. Because like you said, we might be wrong on a lot of math, but we're mostly right. So why not just take another hypothesis? Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right. But if you believe it, you're going to be able to use it a lot easier. I think it's fairly reasonable.
Yes, I realize that. Again, I guess I'm kind of flaky, or maybe at times a bit abrasive, seeing as I'm kind of arguing against my
Well,
own point of the
want to
video.
you don't want to commit to an ideology, and you won't be able to make arguments until you commit to an ideology, because being able to argue is how well you can switch between ideologies, use them as chunkers, extrapolate the infinity result, and then be able to construct in real time the best way to expose your opponent's position as self-refuting. So if you don't have any ideology, you can't stack ideologies and come up with these huge hypotheses, can you?
I mean, could be a quantum ideology.
I'm not sure if it's clear what I'm saying. I think Doovid might understand what I'm saying, but this is a concept I've been coming back to a lot and trying to make it clear that there's no difference between the things that you believe and the things that you think. One is just a more saturated version of the other.
What is the difference?
Well, thoughts are eigenstates of beliefs.
You said think.
Yeah.
Now is thought and
thought.
Okay.
When you're thinking, you're producing thoughts. Yeah, I'm not trying to trick you. They're the same. One is just different part of speech as the other.
Okay.
I'm not the type to try to shoehorn things or slip them under the doorway. I'm more the type to present you with the most jarring aspect of the teachings right off the bat to get a sense of where you're at in your own mind and how much practice you have facing hard facts. Because that's a skill set. It doesn't matter what the hard facts are that you face. The skill set is, did you learn how to deal with the hard facts? Because now you can take that learnedness bereft of facts and bring it to your next thing. Because I got to know how you handle cognitive dissonance. And ultimately, I'm hoping everybody can do that so they have a more peaceful life, so that they don't spend so much time on the stage of arguing that is non-fruitful, and jump to the stage of inquiry where you can actually have a communication with a person, not on the level that you would expect, but nevertheless a meaningful exchange. Because most people are not going to go to the level of actually knowing how and what they think.
I think people can be kind of, well, yeah. I think people are complex, often confused creatures. I know I am. Because I think you could kind of start guiding people along, but then again, entropy is that the most productive thing? Will that help them achieve, like, utilizing the least amount as, putting the other way, free energy possible? I mean, because if a lot of other folks going in a direction and they're doing well and everything, I mean, what's to stop somebody, even if you're showing them something that they might even acknowledge somewhere in their head? It's like, that's probably true, but if I acknowledge that that's true, I might get flack from other people. Maybe I won't get invited to other groups or something like that. So maybe that will hinder my long-term success. So these are other factors there. And I do think, at least within, and again, I'm talking more on a human aspect here, I do think within a lot of groups and communities, it does take a point of getting to almost a critical mass of maybe there's fissioning, maybe there's a fusioning between different groups or something, where you hit a potential state, and then that state can actually transition into something else. Now, it might require a lot of work. Is it necessarily worthwhile? I don't know. But I think it's something to at least attempt to go towards, or at least attempt to achieve. And again, I do appreciate you actually focusing on being like, Mames, actually focus on something so we could try to do something, rather than just being, oh, it's all just a meme, bro. Oh, it might be something, it might not be. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, there's a trade-off, right? Like, if you want to move towards higher knowledge, you're going to have to tolerate people that are going to believe things that you find abhorrent, and that are going to speak to you in a way that you may not consider respectful. And you have to decide, do I give a shit more about the appearance of respect and how people address me, or do I care more about being right? We all have to answer that question. And like, which is the stronger force within us that will dictate where we're meant to be. Because not everyone's meant to be like a sage sitting in a cave contemplating the nature of materialism.
That's fair. I mean, to each their own. Oh, and the last thing I did was cover quote unquote.
Not to each their own. It's you'll get whatever it is that you put in. You'll get the level of certainty that you commit to. But I'm just trying to, impress upon you that it is a trade-off, that these people with this greater knowledge that you're supposedly after may not have the most appealing bedside manner, and they may double down on the bad bedside manner as a means of testing your sincerity. And that's their entitlement, because they're the ones with what you're after. And people are like, there's no way to get around that, is all I'm saying. I think this is the point Doovid has come back to a lot of times, too, especially in the face of people who are like wildly speculating as to the personal beliefs of various rabbis, right? It's like, when you're mind reading for anecdotes, you're in a troubled territory.
Well, at that point, you're just making assumptions and leveling opinions and or accusations. I mean, I thought a lot of the internet was just standard trolling to test somebody that it almost seems like a hazing event online. Because what I found in a lot of these different communities and stuff, somebody might come at you, they'll throw a whole bunch of mean words and say derogatory things, because often they're looking for you to just kind of engage with them, and then they'll just continue to hurl those things until they either embarrass you to the point where you log off or something. Whereas I found, like, if you just sit there and you listen to them and you just continue to just ask questions and go along, because I don't know about y'all, but it's like I still grew up with the whole meme of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I acknowledge this as somebody that fully acknowledges that words can be very hurtful. And it's like, all right, but why am I going to care about what somebody says about me on the internet, especially if it's not true? That's just and my last thing is that I put out there hashtag Snydergate. Was Zack Snyder potentially influenced into basically throwing a particular community that was doing fundraising under the bus? And I can attest, at least from being an orbiter of some of these communities, that there are totally some a-holes within there. I totally acknowledge that. Do I think the vast majority of these folks are like a hate group or something, as some people have inferred? No. And my big thing is, at least according to one individual, he was told by Mr. Snyder, allegedly, that the studio threatened to pull Zack Snyder's Justice League from actually being released. Now, a lot of people said, oh, well, that was just the studio talking big. He had to do this. But what was interesting is I actually found some articles, and apparently it was supposed to launch on one of the Sky networks in the UK at 7 o'clock a.m. Now, Mr. Snyder went on this particular stream right around 9:30 at night, and that's when he made his remarks. Zack Snyder's Justice League was temporarily pulled from launch from Sky in the UK and was replaced with The Family Stone. I believe it was a Jennifer Lawrence holiday film. And that was just very interesting. And just because that's causal anecdotal evidence, again, I don't have multiple sources, but at least that would go into the fact that perhaps these individuals were actually serious. So you put an individual in a position to throw people that are raising money for suicide. As a quick aside, Zack Snyder, the reason why he didn't finish the film initially was his daughter ended up committing suicide. He lost his daughter, and that's why Mr. Whedon ended up finishing the film. It came out in the iteration it was, but since they had all this additional footage, they decided to release it on HBO Max. So my thing is, if a studio basically tells you you need to distance yourself from this group, say some not so nice things about a bunch of people that are raising money for suicide awareness, or we're going to pull the film, and the film was literally actually pulled, that seems to give some credence to it. That's what I did this week.
Some credence to what, sorry?
Credence to basically the studio said, basically, if you do not essentially distance yourself in some way and or kind of throw a particular group under the bus, we're going to pull your work that many of these people were part of a fan movement trying to get to have released. The hashtag release the Snyder Cut movement.
What does this have to do with what we're talking about exactly?
Oh, it was a weekend review, I thought. That was the last thing I did.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
That's all I got. We can go back to the universe and communication. That's also good.
Well, I think that C being a speed limit is a good thing, an important thing, but I don't really know how that's important to... It's not really relevant to much.
Is it a speed limit or a measurement limit?
It's the speed limit. The measurement limit is 3 + 1. So it takes C to measure 3 + 1 at the fastest. The fastest way to make a measurement is C. Hello?
What if we use 2C?
You can't just throw things out there. You got to come up with an argument logically buttressing your position.
We're measuring something using light this way. We're using this. If we come at it from different angles, would that increase our accuracy?
Angles don't exist yet. Length doesn't exist yet. You need length to exist. You need ether to exist for angles to exist. We're not even at that point yet. We're at
Where
the
are
point
we?
of defining what it takes for things to exist. So you've put the cart before the horse. So 3 + 1 is the thing that's intrinsic to the universe. And we can prove this fact to ourselves, but the fastest we could prove it to ourselves would be at the speed of light.
Does light exist now?
We can use light to illuminate the fact that 3 + 1 is the measurement limit.
But doesn't that require the ether?
Yeah, the ether is instantiated at the same time as the measurement limit is, because the ether is the stuff that's between all those spherical entities. Because there's some mass, but then there's also some, like, it's not solid mass on the level of the atom. It's
So
a
what's
waveform?
before the ether?
Nothingness.
I thought it was 3 + 1.
Well, when 3 + 1 becomes instantiated, that's when ether is also instantiated. So before this, you got to always think of it on the scale of the galaxy. Okay, so the galaxy didn't always exist. The sun used to be part of a dark matter region, and the sun began to exist when that dark matter region got so dense that the sun was shat out of it, so to speak. You following me so far?
See, it's some form of a large mass coming together. There was an ejection, and then we got the solar system.
So
Right,
at
no,
the
that makes
speed
sense.
of light, this mass was...
Can I interject here?
Go ahead.
I think I covered everything I wanted for this week in review. I'm feeling a little, just like I can't concentrate. I'm thinking about what's happening in Jerusalem. So maybe I'll just sign off, and you two could continue unless there's something else you want to add before I sign off.
Well, have we gotten to all the subjects that you wanted to talk about? Because we didn't really go
Yeah, I didn't
into
have
it too
anything
much.
more. That was all I wanted to cover, and yeah, I just have a little too much. I can't really concentrate to focus on the stream now.
Okay, well, I hope that your clarity returns soon, and thanks for joining and contributing to the show, and we'll talk to you again next Sunday, if not sooner. And
Okay,
also, I'm
yeah,
really
but-
looking forward to your debate coming up. What date did you say that? Did you say that was the 22nd?
The 21st.
So we'll remind people again when it comes up, because it's not next week, but the week not this week, but the week after, I think. So everyone should show up to that and give a thumbs up for Doooovid there. And yeah, Memes
Yeah.
and I can just keep chatting until he gets tired, and then we can just wrap her up. And unless someone else in the audience wants to come on, if there's anything they want to discuss, I'm always down.
I showed up on the screen share that Charles Moskowitz came out with a new pamphlet book, Satanic Conspiracy, The Spectre Hunting Mankind, kind of like a history of his understanding of Satan, theological, and as a force that man succumbs to causes problems for society. So I'll probably have him on my channel to talk about that, and good for him that he keeps on pumping out books. Just not like really deep. He's just like a pamphlet, but some general good information and thought, and hopefully, me and Jennifer will advance more in our writing. But certainly respect that he's able to pump out a good few books each year. And I'm not really a media personality, but you become more a media personality. It's good to have merchandise, specifically books. I had thought to go maybe into eBay and some of the analytics, some cool stuff. I'm putting up a bunch of books. Actually, some of them are reasonably valuable, so a little bit interesting in the history of publishing and price discovery. But I could ramble on that anytime. So, like, honestly, I'm concerned about what's happening in Jerusalem, and it's probably just not people who watch Week in Review probably don't care that much about what's happening in Jerusalem. So I'm just going to sign off. So have a great Week in Review.
Take care.
Yeah,
great week.
I look forward. I mean, I just don't know. I don't understand a lot about the conflict, but when you're feeling better, I look forward to you.
I feel fine. I just don't.
It.
Yeah, I feel fine. I just just don't. I said everything I wanted to cover for this week, so it's already been 2 hours. There's no hard rule that like Week in Review has to go on for hours and hours. But feel free to continue as long as, and if anyone else wants to, come on and introduce themselves, I'll check it out tomorrow.
Awesome.
See you, bud.
So I can full screen you now.
Oh,
So I just got the shitty icon. So the only thing is that let me see here. Your head is a little bit. The top of your head is chopped off, but let's see if
hold on. Let
It
me.
might just be a matter of altering. Yeah, Aaron's in the chat. He's asking what's happening in Jerusalem. Well, I mean, you're in Israel, man. You probably know better than we do. All I know from Doooovid is that there's some conflict. And that's all. That's all I know. Like I haven't looked too far into it, but
he was covering some footage of basically the tragic stampede the other day.
Well, it sounded like there was like an actual conflict that was getting hot. I don't know, and I saw some bombs going up in the sky. Like I don't know what I saw. I don't trust the sources that I'm.
That's the unfortunate thing. Just because very often it's like, all right, where's the source? The sources are often one way or another at times. It can be hard to tell. And again, maybe they're just basing it off the sources they have. All I know is, do people even know or remember what like a primary or secondary source is now? Like, because I remember back in the day, it's like a primary source was something directly from it. With our modern technology and everything, I sit back and I'm like, all right, even if you have a primary source, like very often people's incentives aren't always to tell the truth. It's just, all right, I'm part of this side, I'm part of this group, I'm going to portray it, and you know what, I might tell the truth, but the way I'm framing it and everything is going to lead to a particular thoughts in many people's heads of one thing. And the unfortunate thing is, it seems like since very often it seems like we just don't trust each other anymore, that folks that might be viewed as quote unquote on the other side are just automatically going to discount it because they heard key words. They're like, well, these are buzzwords that they use that are very influential for some folks. And then other people hear them and they're like, all right, I'm automatically going to assume the worst in this person. And that's what bothers me. And I'm trying to work on modern mimetic theory, just because if we can try to start decoding this or see some causal relationships, I think we can better understand our fellow creature. At least that's the goal.
And
have
you come to any conclusions?
Conclusions?
Yeah.
I mean, things are making more and more sense. just because the more and more you talk to people, and especially if people feel like you're not out gunning to destroy them, people actually share a lot of information and stuff. Because this is one of the things that I've even noticed within, even within like some of the last things when I was talking about certain groups and communities. Like, this is one of the reasons I found myself even just kind of like within this community over here on the Church of Entropy on Jen's channel, is because I found myself being driven more to like the math and sciences, just to kind of get away from just like so much petty drama. Because it's like you follow it for a while, like, oh my god, can you believe what this person does, and you just see not the exact same but very similar situations again and again and again, and it just becomes so emotionally taxing and realistically to me just kind of boring too,
Well, it's
because it's
because
like, all right,
people are lying. They're saying they don't like drama, but they do. So you
it's rule,
sort of have
yeah.
to deal with the fact that people are lying about, they're misrepresenting their opinions.
I tend to find people that often go around, not all, but proclaiming how much they hate drama seem to be some of the people that love drama the most. It's just, I don't know, it's just a causal observation, an anecdote, if you will, but rule 14 of the internet, everyone loves a good dumpster fire.
That what they mean to say is that they love drama, but that they don't want to admit it because then that would involve a loss in social prestige, but their actions demonstrate that they have an attachment to drama. Now, that's not to say that they enjoy every aspect of the drama cycle, but they have an attachment to being part of drama as part of their identity, but they're not able to admit it to themselves because, ooh, that would be, bad, but that's just what their behavior demonstrates.
Are you saying that it could potentially be possible that some of the folks within some of the communities I might be a part of, when drama arises, and I just straight up go, I love drama, that maybe that's not what I'm supposed to do, and maybe why I'm not always invited to different things that other people are?
Yeah, it's a taboo.
Oh no. Well, these things happen.
It would be a taboo.
Oh, well, I thought we were supposed to be honest.
If the whole thing is self-deception to claim you don't like drama when you actually partake in it all the time and thereby obviously love drama, people don't want to face that. It would cause dissonance because the whole community is based on denying the fact that they love drama. So if somebody comes right out and says it, that's a turd in the punch bowl.
Oh, the terrible thing is, Jen. No, it's I almost I don't want to necessarily just call it Jen's theorem, but the way you were kind of arguing before about just reconceptualizing about people lying, it's like, again, I think most folks are good people, but at the same time,
people are lying to themselves. That doesn't make them bad people. That's why you got to get rid of the good bad thing. You got to say, do you want a positive outlook on people if it's inaccurate and it leads to more suffering? Well, I think you want the accurate representation of people because that's one that minimizes the suffering. Because if you're talking to a person that's not there, your chances of communication are zero.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with pleasantries or anything like that. I mean, again, part of society has been built upon that, but I think, unfortunately, that may have kind of led to where we're at. Because how often, I'm not sure about your experience, but very often I've gone throughout a day or something, it's like, oh, hey, how you doing? Good. You know what? Very often I've said that. Was I doing well or good? No, I may have been having an absolutely crappy day, but it was literally just a conditioned response.
It's a ritual. It's a ritual to convey the information that, yeah, I'm part of society. It's just like it's communicating without actually communicating any information. The information that's being communicated is conformity to a social ritual. Like, you got to understand, cult is the root of culture. So there's going to be these pseudo-religious things riddled throughout society, man, and you got to understand them that way in order to improve your own communication. Because right now you're trying to understand things on their face, and that works sometimes. Mostly it doesn't work. But this approach does work because really what they're expecting is for you to reflect back their own thing that they're going to say. How's it going, man? Good. How about you, man? Fucking great, dude. What
we're
does
just
it all
putting
mean?
words
It
out
means
there to
fuck
fill.
all, right? Like when you get bored and cooped up at home, you want to go out to a party. Then when you've been at a party for 5 hours, you want to go home and fall into bed, right? It's like it's all just platitudes and pleasantries, and going against them conveys the information that you are not one of the herd. So you're not espousing the values of slave morality, which may cause friction with people who identify as that as the supreme good, i.e. the hen peckers. Conform or you're evil. Are those people good? Well, they're not evil. It's just that they're the thing that was adaptive, which was their browbeating conformity for slave morality, which has its place, has become dysfunctional because it doesn't have a balancing pole to impose the correct moral guidance that allows for it to be non-destructive.
I'm totally gonna meme the heck out of that. The culture war. Oh, people thinking it's like, well, we're involved in a cult, and very often I just put culture war in quotations there because it's like, is there a culture war? I popped on some different people's programs that haven't been as active, but I know have been paying attention
They're
for a
conflicts.
while.
They're conflicts.
It's interesting when you go back to like people living in denial. And do I know this is the case? No, but I was almost about to say it's like, all right, if you just assume that everybody is lying, and you're almost kind of doing what like Gregory House.
Don't
was, like,
assume
well,
that. Don't assume that.
Or
Don't assume that.
okay, no. You could make an argument for that. I try to
You
come
just
from.
don't assume that anyone is telling the truth unless they give you a reason to. What you don't assume, you don't say fucking liars. They're all fucking liars, because then you're putting a negative spin on things. It's just they don't have that awareness. You can look at it as that they're self-deceiving, but really they're just deceived. They don't have any higher cognition. They don't know any better, right? And it starts to become antagonistic when they've been shown and they don't accept it. But then you just got to say, well, they just don't have that much cognition, right? It's not bad or good. It's just they have bad karma. They have low karma.
It's the information they also have and stuff, and it's the world as they know it.
It
See,
doesn't make them evil, though. It doesn't make them evil any more than it makes, good. You got to sort of take the good and evil out of it and realize that that's not really defined until you can state the parameters of suffering. Because it's a question of how much suffering does a particular action cause.
Is that the Dharma?
Well, that would be like the metric for whether something is conforming with the least harm principle, right? Because something is conforming with least harm principle if it can be demonstrated to minimize harm. And that implies that you've already systematized how much harm versus non-harm it's going to cause, right? Because there's always going to be some fallout because steel sharpens steel. You're familiar with this idea that, like, in order to forge something nice, it needs to go through a very baptism of fire type transformative process, and the thing that makes the steel sharp is steel. Does that
Or
make
sharpening
sense?
stone. Yeah, well,
That's
exactly.
why, like,
You're causing
conflict is
spark.
not
Yeah.
something you're going to get rid of. Conflict is intrinsic to existence because conflict is what sharpens us. I'm not talking about physical fighting here necessarily. I'm saying that this, crossing of swords, the proverbial crossing of swords, right? Like, it does not always going to take a physical form. It could take a spiritual form where it's like a religious debate or any type of debate you could really imagine. That's still channeling aggression, and it's still having conflict, but it doesn't end destructively. So the aggression part, which is what ultimately leads to conflict, is just one of the human temperaments. It's never going away.
Are you familiar
So it's not
with
good or bad. It's just there.
Are you familiar with the Professor Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman interview from a couple of years back?
I don't think I saw that one in particular. Like, I'm kind of familiar with what Peterson is saying to some extent.
Okay.
But I don't know about what was covered in that. Like, what was the
Well, it
idea?
kind of goes into something you said, but a lot of people would probably disagree with me, which is fine. I was curious because I just wanted to gauge your base reaction from it, because based upon what you just said, I remember the morning, because I was at work at the time, was it Channel 4 in the UK, they were releasing like the full, I think it was like 29, 30-minute interview with Professor Peterson. And at one point, Kathy Newman, she's going through there and she's asking, and at one point she's almost being kind of like satirical. It's like, so what you're saying is we should be more like the lobsters. And she kept on doing, so what you're saying is, so that kind of became a meme for a lot of people. And at one point during the Newman, she's like, well, why should you be able to say these offensive things that might offend these people? And then Professor Peterson came back with, well, I mean, why should you be so abrasive with asking me questions in the way you have in this interview? It's been quite uncomfortable. And at that, but like, why should I not be offended? And Miss Newman, at one point, she was taken aback for a moment, and then Professor Peterson ended up saying, "Ha, got you," in a little bit of a lighthearted way, but he did receive criticism for that. But a lot of folks said, "Oh my God, she was being so disingenuous and everything." For me, I heard people's reactions like that after, and a lot of the folks that were saying that were big fans of Professor Peterson, in my opinion. But when I heard that, I happen to be a decent fan of the professor and been following some of his work. And for me, I'm like, this is an excellent interview for him because, okay, you're a professor. You have what many say, whether they are or not, controversial ideas. People have heard controversial things about you, and you were being put to the test. You were going through a trial by fire. And as far as I could see, you succeeded your trial by fire, even though there was some criticism. So that's why when you say steel sharpens steel, that's what I view it as. And that's what I'd love to see more of the internet on, actually having like good faith, actual discussions and arguments to see if you could actually get to a point where it's like, oh, the person's like, huh, you actually have a point there.
Yeah, you could call it the infinity straw man of the presumed moral high ground. Well, why are you a bad person? How can I produce an anecdote that proves through my axioms that you're a bad person, thereby justifying my previously axiomatized moral high ground? Right? It's the pearl clutching thing.
Well, I mean, can't you just come at it from the other end as well? It's like,
It should
I'm
be
going to
acknowledged
assume
as a bad debate tactic, and anyone who engages in it should be acknowledged as being a fraud.
so the opposite of that would be assuming a person is right and then working in the other direction from there, or basically trust but verify.
Oh, well, I don't know if you can say opposite, right? Because opposite relative to what stationary point? Because if you're talking about opposites, you need to be able to define the middle. I'm not sure there is a middle
Would
in this case.
it be perpendicular, parallel? I'm not
These
good at
words
geometry.
may not apply. They may just be neither, right? Because most things are just two sets, like a Venn diagram, where just your standard Venn diagram where there is an overlap, but it's not 100%. It's somewhere between 0 and 100.
Is that chirality? Or I don't know. Because chirality is kind of like hands and stuff, right? It's like, all right, it's more or less the mirror image, but it's not quite the same.
Well, we can say
just
that like we can say the proton is the opposite of the electron. Is that true? It's only true if you've defined what you mean by opposite, right? Like, okay, within the from perspective of electric charge, yeah, that's true. But from another perspective, we could say that the neutron is the opposite of the proton and the electron, but it's along a different axis of polarity. That's my point. And there may not even be an opposite, because what I said was the infinity straw man of the presumed moral high ground. That may not even have a well-defined opposite.
I mean,
But if you were going to define an opposite, you'd need to say, how is it opposite, right? Because I gave you the example with like the fundamental particles. It's like, it could be opposite charge-wise, or it could be opposite, activity-wise, or charge in a different way, right? Like, because the neutron doesn't have a charge and the proton and electron do have charges.
No. That's interesting because I mean, it really is kind of the geometry there, depending on how you lay things out there. You might have one causal or relational value there, but depending on how you're looking at it and how you're trying to fold things, it is going to end up differently.
There's more than one kind of opposite. Like, I think we have this idea in the modern day that opposite, there's a thing and it's opposite and that's it. There's A and not A. So in Boolean algebra, the union of A and not A is the universe. But clearly, we're not spanning the universe if there's two different types of, quote, opposites. Oppositism is relative, I suppose. So you'd have to like be more specific, like what's the opposite of the infinity straw man of the presumed moral high ground? Well, opposite in effect, opposite in intention, opposite in, you see what I'm saying?
Mode, median. It's yeah.
We can draw
it's-
multiple opposites and we're gonna still get more information. So these like directions of drawing opposites can't be perpendicular, or sorry, they can't be the same. They can't be linearly dependent or parallel, but they're not necessarily perpendicular. So they could be any angle between not 0 and 90, right? Because once you get past 90, you're back to approaching it again.
So, for the sake of communicating a point, I'll go to the classical quote unquote opposite, or at least based upon a generic observation. Is I'm on the internet, I see a lot of people that often say, we should not engage in ad hominem attacks. They get into a debate with somebody and they very often just initially go for ad hom attacks when they start getting into any trouble or anything like that. And they're just assuming the person is wrong and they're being uncharitable and everything. I'm like, okay, well, let me say that ad hom attacks are effective. Avoid, at least for the most part, engaging in ad hom attacks unless maybe it's at least of a certain comedic nature that I feel is a bit more relevant and might actually get the person to laugh, or at least folks around them to laugh a little bit, and just assume that what they're telling me is true. And if what they're telling me is true, what would be in place? So I'm like, okay, if this is true, is this in place? No. Okay, we'll take a step back. You know what? Sometimes I say, well, is this in place? Yes. Or there's an even better structure. So either I'm going to learn something that I didn't know before out of it, which helps me, or at the same time, if these things aren't present, it's slowly, basically what they're stating is true is slowly receding as well. It's kind of like grains of sand being washed out from a beach. I'm using more of an erosional rather than saying you are wrong, these are reasons you're wrong. I'm saying you're right. The reasons you're right would be these reasons. And if these reasons are not in play, well, it's slowly drawing back. So I'm not necessarily attacking a person saying you're wrong, you're evil. I'm just actually trying to figure out if what they're saying is actually true. And if it's true, great. And if it's not, then well, we should be able to see that. That's just kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and you're going to find that most people are not able to transcend their own beliefs. So what do you do then?
Well, I think I stopped getting invited on these programs. I'm just saying this is just an anecdotal response of, all right, well, memes is here, and
Okay,
the one gone.
You dropped out for a second. I can hear you again now, but yeah, go ahead.
The one constant that I seem to have is that I ruin everything. People very often get worked up. They're getting into their little circle wanks, and oh my God, bad people are bad. Can you believe these bad things? And all of a sudden I'll pop up in a chat. I'm like, well, aren't you just kind of perpetuating this by saying all these not so nice things about these people that you're saying are bad? That will turn around and say these people are bad because they're being bad to us. And then I usually get ignored.
Yeah, people don't want solutions, but they also can't face that fact. So they just want to dwell in the circle of drama where they can continue to bolster the illusion of this conflict. That becomes their identity because without the perceived conflict, their identity gets undermined, which, as we know from the theory, everybody seeks to fulfill their identity. And so reject stimulus that undermines their identity. Right. So that would be predictable. So basically, you need to recognize in your own words when you're destroying people's sandcastles, right? Because that's what you're doing. They're building a sandcastle on the beach. You're coming in and hitting one of the towers, and then they're like, "Fuck you," and you're like, "What? Your tower fucking sucked balls."
I do like wrecking sandcastles. It's so true.
But
It's
I
so
mean,
true. Yeah, no, I like that
I get
metaphor.
it. Like it's like I understand that some people really like that, and I think Doovid's a bit like that too. And maybe that's why we get along. But I don't have that intention. Like I don't have the enjoyment of it. But when I am going to kick down a sandcastle, I'm going to hit the bottom of it, and I'm going to completely reduce it to nothing. So
You just
it's
Hulk
like
smash things.
don't push me to that point. That's my lesson is don't push me to that point because it's easy not to. Just don't do it. It's easy, so I won't do it. But yet it still happens sometimes. But yeah, so it's like it's a different philosophy because it's like needling versus TKOing. It's a philosophy. So I find my philosophy is quite good. But your philosophy is more just like the immature end of it, no offense. I'm not saying you have to let that go. I'm just saying that you'll be better if you don't care. If you're not trying to destroy, you're better at destroying. I don't know.
Are you saying I should be more mean?
I'm saying do you want to hit down a castle that's going to get rebuilt tomorrow? Or do you want to nuke it so that nothing can ever be built there again?
I prefer being tactical
Would
with
you
my
rather
nukes.
have the capacity to nuke it whenever you want it, but you could also walk through the sandcastles and enjoy them for what they were and not feel more happy to see them be built than destroyed?
I mean, I do have as a Godzilla fan, I mean, utilizing all that radioactivity would likely produce like Godzilla type creatures that will just ravage around. And I mean, that might be something that I'd like metaphorically, of course, but as far as actually doing that, my problem is I feel like I might be too effective at it at times, in that I just hurt a lot of people when I actually just like target and just go right for like the jugular there, and that it's just very quick, and then I hurt a lot of people's feelings, and I feel bad about it.
But you're doing it for the lulls, right?
No, I'm usually doing it because it seems to be true, but a
No,
lot of
that's
people
just what you
don't like
tell
it.
yourself, but you're doing it for the entertainment, at least partly.
Oh, absolutely. It's more like, oh, this person's been getting under my craw, so I'm just going to I call it soul striking a person, where you literally, in as few words as possible, you strike at the core of their actual being itself to shatter them. It's like, all right, somebody's saying something. It's like, oh, so what you're saying is you're an Ayn Randian socialist. It's like, what the heck does that mean? It's like, no. You're thinking in a quote unquote selfish manner. You're trying to act in a way that's going to be positive for yourself. And it's like, you're saying, well, we don't need to do these programs. Why? Because some of these people, and again, nothing wrong with somebody that happens. It's just a lot of folks I find that are hating on like welfare benefits and stuff themselves often at times have to be on benefits. And I just find that a very interesting thing. So it's like, all right, you're arguing you don't want other people to get stuff because you get stuff already via this process. And a lot of people hate hearing that, especially if they're of a libertarian mindset. It just kind of like goes at their soul. And I ended up kind of deleting the tweet and stuff like that, because I'm just like, why did I do this? I'm like, I just did this to be mean. I did this to be mean and get people on it. And I actually found what happened after it. One of my friends, God rest his soul, I'm like, oh, so and so must have left my channel because I just saw them resubscribe. That was interesting. So, but your sandcastle metaphor really hit home, because I remember when I was in the 6th grade, we were doing this project on Egypt. My group was doing a pyramid and stuff, which I ended up building out of Connects, and then we modeled around. But we were carrying another team. They had basically a big, like, 3-dimensional thing of Egypt. It was probably like 5x5 thing. We were moving it. I backed into a wall, and it was the most comedic thing in the world. And I was just like bumped into the wall. I was like, oh, I felt like Goofy. It's like, oh, I caught myself. And I planted a knee right through the center of Egypt. I felt bad.
Whoops.
These things happen.
I mean, I like building stuff, but I don't like building temporary stuff. I like building permanent stuff. And I don't like destroying sandcastles or building sandcastles because they're all just sand. That's the way I look at it. I'm not saying that's the way you have to look at it. I'm just saying that that's the eventuality of pursuing it.
I prefer something with like, I don't know, a rock or steel solid foundation, because at least if you have a good strong core foundation, at least it should last the test of at least a while.
Well, it should survive the tide coming in, right?
That's a good metaphor. I like that. I'm totally using it.
And no sandcastle can do that. So you're sort of starting. If you start building a castle, you've already failed to build the thing you want to build, which is the boat, because the boat could survive the tide. The boat isn't limited to being on land either. But most people are too afraid of going on a boat. And that's just the reality. So it's like you can either have compassion for them or you can resent them. But the resentment is just going to destroy you. And so it's like you probably can keep going destroying the sandcastles, but eventually you'll have to learn the lesson that you're just sort of putting out waves of destruction, which eventually hit back on you. 'Cause it's like a finite beach metaphor sort of thing. One planet.
Are we back at Genesis and having to build an ark?
I don't know any of these metaphors.
Oh, build an ark, Noah, flood, water, boat,
Oh,
salvage, world. I think that might be what Elon Musk is trying to do.
I guess it's like an archetypal trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole everything's going down, we gotta save, like a rescue boat type thing. So yeah, I mean that could be it, because like every time you die is kind of like the tide coming in. And so if all you've built is a sandcastle, then the tide's going to wash it all away. But if you have a boat, then you might get capsized, but you can right the boat again. You don't have to rebuild a boat. You already have a boat. Or you have the technology to build a boat, right? So it's about remembering what was actually important. It's like not about the castles, it's about the boats. And the people on the boats can go to way more places than the people with the castles. And the people with the castles do not want to go on boats because they're scared. And they also don't want to be reminded that they're scared. And so you have a duty to, well, not a duty, but a choice to either be compassionate about that fact that they're terrified or to ridicule them.
I wonder if that's why liquor was created.
Sorry?
I wonder if that's why liquor was created.
It helps.
It also sun, but no, Jen, this has been great. My mind is getting very tired, and before we start delving into the metaphysics, and I would like to talk to you about your conceptualization about perhaps souls and stuff like that at some point. Because I remember you were kind of delving into a little bit. I do not have the mental capacity nor real time at the moment to delve into that, but I would, because I have some ideas that I'd like to run past you. I'm curious your thoughts.
Awesome. My system does not have the soul entity. It has the consciousness entity. So we don't define a soul. It's you could call it, like, once you understand how consciousness works, whatever aspect of that you want to call the soul, feel free. But I don't really know the difference between a soul and a consciousness. So I don't want to tell you what the soul is, because I still don't really know what the difference is, if that's
Fair
okay.
point.
I mean, not to be like, there's certain religious connotations with the soul. Would you agree?
No. I understand, and I actually respect you actually putting it, even if it's a parentheses differentiation on there, because that's actually respectful. So
I
that's why
don't
like
want to.
you.
I mean, if I start saying stuff like that, it might cause a lot of harm to people with particular religious beliefs, and there's no real trade-off, because what are the chances of them acceding to my opinions if they're already super offended that I've botched the definition of soul according to them, right? So it's just like, I don't need this term. I'm just going to stick with subjective consciousness, and then we can sort of chunk that out into what that consists of. And if you want to identify some part of that as the soul and make an argument for it, be my guest. I just don't have I'm not gonna do that.
Oh,
I hope
okay.
I hope that's sort of like just me. Yeah, I hope it's clear that I just started trying to be neutral in the sort of religious sense and just keep it to strictly science.
I believe the term at that point is you're fulfilling your dharma. See, even I can still learn some things occasionally. But
Oh,
thank you for having me. Peace out,
thanks for
Jen.
coming
We'll
on.
see y'all later.
Good chat. Thanks to the audience for coming on or to
Okay.
coming and listening. And hopefully we'll have some more people join in the future. And I'm glad that people liked my boat metaphor. Because, yeah, there's a lot of good lessons in sailing. Like, I don't know. I think if you're not experienced on boats, you can get motion sickness pretty easily. Because if your body, if your mind, if your eyes can't focus in on like a fixed point, i.e., if you're not looking at the horizon, um, your subconscious thinks that you've been poisoned, so you get the same effects as what your body does to reject poison, right? Because subconscious identifies the inability to identify a fixed point, which we take for granted when we're on solid ground. Takes that as like interprets that rather as, oh shit, I've been poisoned, I better barf. Right? So you get that like dizziness and then oof, and then yeah, I don't need to go into all the gory details, but so one of the first things you learn when you're, pleasure sailing, cruising, or whatever you want to call it, is to look at the horizon so that you don't get motion sickness. Because even if if there's land, it's better because that's more of a fixed point. But even if it's just the horizon with nothing, it's better than staring at something on the boat, which is also subject to the movement of the boat relative to the surrounding water, which is also subject to its own movement, right? So, all that to say that when you're getting it started, you're going to spend a lot of time building a boat. And people on the beach were like, what the hell's wrong with you? Why aren't you making a castle everyone else is? You're stupid. And crazy for making a boat. And then, sometime later you get on the boat and you can go sailing and where everyone else is landlocked. And they're like, whoa, that's impossible. And I can't believe the level of freedom but obviously had a lot of discipline where you had to tolerate ridicule for people who didn't understand what the point of the discipline was, but then you get all the rewards afterwards. So the getting on the boat at first is sort of like the quantum state. It's a metaphor for a quantum state transition. Because when you're building the boat, you're not getting any benefits of sailing. You're just going through penance, which is why they say penance, tapas, or whatever word you want to use. There's a point where you have to put in a lot of work where there's no real result. Not the result you're after, right? Because what you're after is to be able to sail. When you're just building the boat, you're learning things about like what the boat consists of, and how it's going to move, and you can imagine a little bit of that, but you're not actually doing the eventual goal. But once the boat is made, if it's made correctly, you can sail pretty much right away. Like I remember the first time I went sailing, it wasn't great, but I didn't crash the boat or anything, or I was able to go from point A to point B somewhat somewhat efficiently, and then you sort of get better and better and better. And that's more how it works. So there's a period of being totally what you could call secular, where you're not focused on boat building at all. And then the period of boat building, followed by the period of being shitty at sailing, followed by a period of being good at sailing. So there's all sorts of chunks, right? Steps. And, this metaphor, I think, helps people understand like the mistakes that some people make spiritually, where they try to jump to the, make a sailboat out of sand type thing, where it's like, you cannot sail with that. And maybe you can delude yourself into thinking it, but then you're going to get overtaken very quickly by a better sailor because you're not alone out in the ocean. More in the ocean than on land. So it's kind of interesting. Like these are all sort of archetypal errors, right? It's like profiling really is super important. Like, what you want to get as close as you can to understanding what drives someone. Because a lot of people claim to be after the truth, but that's just something that people say. They don't really care about it. And you may not even care about it as much as you think that you do, because you won't really know the depths of your feelings until you actually have the bravery to test them. And that's sort of where most people are stuck. Like, Vincent couldn't even acknowledge my point, even though I don't see how anyone could deny it. I mean, look at the train of people that has come on this show and how much pushback there's been against the things that I've said that is like unsubstantiated, obviously knee-jerk denial, obviously profiling as something true that was inconvenient and unflattering. And again, it's back to the choice. Like, do you accept that it's a lot more complicated than you thought, or it's not the way you thought, and do you embrace what is more accurate, or do you double down on your crazy idea that people's beliefs dictate their actions? The beliefs that people have de facto and the beliefs that they have that they're capable of expressing, not the same thing. Why? Bunch of taboos. Most people aren't consciously aware of the taboos. Like, it's really easy to look back once I explain it. Oh yeah, it's a taboo not to say that you're doing fine when someone asks you how you're doing. Oh, okay, I get it. I was actually being combative all those times that I didn't answer fine, to somebody asking me how I was doing or whatever. So that concludes my little ramble. Looks like I was able to stream solo for a good 2 to 3 minutes. Yay me. Got to start somewhere. And we'll talk to you guys next Sunday, if not sooner. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like, we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with